We are live. Good evening, everybody. How is everyone doing tonight? So I just realized actually before doing the stream, I don't know how daylight savings time works because some people in the UK were saying that it didn't change for them. And I know it changed for me because I had the most glorious extra hour of sleep this morning. Yep. And daylight savings is sort of like a double-edged sword because it's nice, but it gets dark at 4 o'clock in the afternoon here, which, given everything else that's going on in the world, and more specifically Quebec and Canada, it's going to be a long, long, bloody winter. Okay. Anyways, I hope everyone is good. Send out the links and share it around just for whatever, because sometimes notifications come 12 hours later. It is going to be, you're going to hear noise upstairs. We have tried to distract the 3 children with Kindergarten Cop. And surprisingly inappropriate certain scenes, because I watched it recently. Yesterday, we watched Hear No Evil, See No Evil. More classic than I could ever remember. We lived in a time when people were not afraid to swear in movies, and where it didn't... it was a good movie, and I'd never realized the chemistry that Richard Pryor had with Gene Wilder. It was beautiful. Okay. Right on cue, Mike Dolan. It seems like Facebook and Twitter are actively manipulating accounts to affect the election. How does this affect your picks? So let's say we don't want to accuse anyone of doing anything to affect the election. They are, what is the word I'm looking for? They are enforcing rules in a very one-sided direction. If one were to observe in that sense, we're going to get into it. I mean, we talked about it last week. It's insane. It's insane. You know, the New York Post's Twitter account was just unlocked after a 2-week stare down between Jack and New York Post. And you have Jake Tapper telling them, just delete the post and then repost it now that it no longer offends the new rules. It's Orwellian, Kafka-esque. Caca is what it is. I don't think it's going to have any positive impact on the outcome. I think this is awakening people who might have otherwise been center to left, if we want to stick those labels on them. Okay, a lot of super chats coming in this. Okay, so first things first. Thank you in advance for the super chats. I'm going to do my best to get to all of them. Not only are there no guarantees that I'm not going to get to all of them, there are guarantees I'm not going to get to all of them. I'm going to do my best to bring them all up. If I miss them, I thank you in advance. If that's going to upset you, if I miss it, do not give the super chat because it puts pressure on me, and I don't like making people feel bad or making people think that we're stealing money just, to do it. 30% goes to YouTube. So bear that in mind if you don't want to make a $1 billion company more billions. Other methods of supporting Robert Barnes and myself and my channel, we'll get into that in a second as well. Now, let's see here. Before I lose all of them, I just lost all the super chats that I was. I just heard someone watch the potty talk, Viva. Caca. Caca with a capital C is what it is. It's crazy. And the games that they make you play, just delete the tweet, then repost it because now it won't break the rules. But the last time it did, even though it didn't. So just do what Big Brother says. And it's the proverbial embodiment, whatever, of making the victim scream, I love Big Brother, while they, beat you into submission. None of your business says socialism is a cultural tumor. No comment. And by the way, that's another thing. Me bringing up the super chat or the comment is not an endorsement. That's it. Sunday nights just got much better. Thank you very much, Truth in Politics. 2020. I like the super chat amount. Okay, so then I'll just bring these up here until Robert comes in. Love all of this. Dave Nachsen Albright. I grew up with attorneys. Law is fascinating. It's fascinating from an external perspective, soul-crushing from an internal perspective, but always enlightening. Where it gets really soul-crushing is when you realize there is no justice. Who was I listening to? Oh, yeah, Scott Adams Win Bigley, when his mother says, when the kid's fighting, life's, it's not fair. She says, life's not fair. People, even as adults, we think that there should be some cosmic fairness in life, and that's, I guess, why some of us, have to believe in an afterlife for that cosmic justice. Don't vote. Vote Kofefe. Biden versus Trump's gibberish. Who just tweeted that? Tim Pool, I think, tweeted something like that. Quite funny. Quite funny because it pokes fun at both candidates, which is where you have good fun. Okay, thank you for the super chat. So this is what I was going to say. Super chats, thank you very much. Not a right of conversation, not a right of entry into the conversation. I do my best. What do we have on the menu tonight? Okay, as far as I had to do so much last minute reading today that I feel like I'm going to school without having done my homework. I tried to do my best on the Project Veritas defamation lawsuit, but I've read enough that we can talk about it. I read through the Jerry Falwell Jr. defamation lawsuit. That's a tough thing to read. I mean, we're gonna talk about that. We are obviously doing the Kyle Rittenhouse update. We are doing the election lawsuits update, and we're gonna probably talk about some of the developments that have now become mainstream news within a period of 2 weeks, from censorship, Russia disinformation to mainstream news, because it's undeniable. Viva, I love your chats and your vlogs. Please have Uncivil Law on one night with you guys. Absolutely. I'm going to go on Uncivil's channel. We were going to do it last week, but schedules just don't work. But I'm going to go back on Uncivil's channel, and we're going to do a stream sooner than later. Oh, I see Barnes. He's coming. Okay, let me see if I can get to these quickly. What can be done about the voter fraud incidents unearthed by Project Veritas? We're going to talk about that during the Project Veritas defamation discussion, because it's an interesting thing. It says, watching you daily says, Viva, what Twitter fails to mention is that they can manually remove the restrictions. Of course they can. Of course they can. But they want you to do it for them so that they don't have to do it. And it's like they want to manipulate you into doing their bidding for them so that they don't have to do it. On the one hand, they keep their hands clean, and it's an act of dominance and a compelling an act of subservience. That's what it is. And it's just a pure game. It's just to assert dominance in a relationship and let little brother know who big brother is. Okay, that's as political as I'm going to get tonight. Let's see what's got here. You can't even hype HB fully in YouTube chat. HB. You can't even type HB. Hold on one second. What is that? It doesn't show up on the screen. You missed my 6,701,000. That's Real Bambuga. Good to see you again. Oh, here we go. We have some Tim Pool fans here. Awesome. I don't know if that cue is it's a subliminal message or just a typo. Where's the exclamation point to a cue? Uncivil, welcome. And we are doing a live stream next week. It'll be on your channel after Tuesday. And maybe we might even have some news on our bet with Sullivan. Okay. I see Barnes. He's looking good. I'm going to bring him in. Mr. Robert, oh my goodness. If anyone had any doubts as to who Barnes was supporting during this election, the cat is out of the bag.
Indeed. As to who I am betting on and to who I voted for, it would be that guy right there. We don't have a choice. We just got to make America great again.
It is amazing. This is a funny thing. Everybody knows everybody knows your political stance. We see you on Twitter. We follow you on Twitter. I get a different feel from, say, if that's an endorsement for Trump. I mean, it's the first time you've publicly indicated who you're voting for on this channel, but not that anybody has a doubt. That strikes me as being different than what Lady Gaga did today and what Chelsea Handler does. There's just a way of rubbing me badly when someone says who they're voting for versus someone telling you who you should vote for. And I always, that's why I never ever say who I'm voting for regardless, because I don't want to walk that line. But I think you walk it well, even if I am totally biased. But did you see Lady Gaga's video?
I did not. I just saw the photo image of it, but I didn't watch it.
I can't understand if it was like a double fakey Trump support. She's dressed up like, I don't know what she thinks she's dressed up as, sitting in front of a pickup truck, drinking a beer, saying, she's an American voting for Biden. I don't know who she's making fun of, and I don't know who she thinks she's making fun of. I couldn't get the tone of it. It looked like a double false flag type thing, like she's actually making fun of Biden supporters' perception of Trump supporters, but that might have been like, too much next level.
Maybe, yeah. It seemed like she was trying to dress up like a Trump supporter. So, but I saw that, but obviously she wasn't backing Trump, so I didn't know what the logic of that appearance was.
It's art imitating life, imitating art, imitating life. Voted once, of course, not like you had several ballots mailed to your house or anything. Tony Nieves. Well, we're going to get into the elections updates. Maybe we'll do that first. But first things first, Robert, you want to break the news? This is the big news. It's not such big news, but it's going to be interesting. We'll see what people think. You want to do it, Rob?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so the goal is to create a community of conversation that's convivial and civil. where we can engage with the core portions of our audience in a manner that's not interfered with or intruded upon by trolls and others acting in bad faith. That's one objective. A parallel objective is how to create a place where we can make sure that we are protected from censorship and suppression by YouTube, by Google, by Twitter, by Facebook. I've had major problems with Facebook over the last year. Massive suppression of any page that I have any association with. That started not long after legally representing Alex Jones, but Twitter started after I sued Twitter. But because of that, so we are creating a page on locals. And the goal is to, and this will be, in fact, on election night, it will be the only place I will be answering questions, and it will be the exclusive place where I will be responding all night long to legal questions, political questions, betting questions, voting questions, you name it. Will solely be on our locals page. And the goal is to create a place where we can come together, chat, converse in a reasonable manner, like the great salons of the French Enlightenment, like the great taverns of American Revolutionary era, which spread the message of Thomas Paine and helped spread the revolutionary ideology that became the American Revolution, was based in that place. So to create a place where we can have meaningful, thorough conversation, what Twitter and Facebook and Google and YouTube were supposed to be about, this is a place that is actually about that. In addition, and the goal is to create for a very low monthly flat fee, $5 a month, and you can't get a lawyer to answer a question typically for $5. So that is an extraordinarily low amount. No 2 tiers, 3 tiers, 4 tiers, 6 tiers. We're not Linwood, so it's a fully accessible. And we're just going to be there. And the locals is completely free of censorship or suppression. Dave Rubin founded it and started it and got it off the ground for the purpose to have a place that was free of both trolls and free of censorship and suppression. They only take up, I think, 10%, so it's a much 10%. Lower percentage than YouTube. We're going to be doing our future polls on there for upcoming live streams here. Where we'll down the road we'll be doing after shows exclusively there after the show for just that. So it's a place where you can go, where many of you have asked. And I'm bombarded with too many questions currently, and I'm getting people that are harassing in good and bad faith. And I take everybody at their word, and so I've been engaging people in ways that is not productive of my use and my time. So the goal is to make sure you do have that continued access, to democratize the understanding of the law, which is the whole point and purpose of this show, and to continue that unabated in a place that's very affordable, that's very accessible, but it's still a controlled and curated community that's effectively by invitation only. So that's what the subscription does, and it's a very, very low fee to get in the door.
And to explain that a little bit, also, yeah. So locals takes 10% compared to YouTube's 30%. It's sort of, I'm getting familiar with it because the layout is sort of Facebook-like, and you can view posts even if you're not members, but then if you want to interact, you have to be a supporter. And basically, we're not going to get rid of anything of the free stuff on YouTube. It's just that a lot of people are noticing that even if they want to support here, some of the interactions in anonymous online platforms, when there's no paywall, so to speak, are not always friendly, and they're not always productive. And it's a good place. It'll be more direct. It's not going to detract from anything we have here, but it's just going to be another way to support the channel, have more open discussion with less unproductive intrusions, and you can get more direct access to Robert and myself. I may not be answering the legal questions, but I might feel, I say, not more free to express some opinions. I will take for granted everyone's going to screenshot that and use it against me in the future in any event, but it will be a different place to have a more meaningful discussion that is not necessarily the place in the comment section on YouTube, in as much as I try to engage. So I put the link in. I'll put it in again one more time with the generic pop-up, but follow us there. We'll see how it works out. It looks good thus far, and it's going to be fun for election night.
Oh, exactly. It's going to be vivabarneslaw.locals.com. You can also just go to locals and look up Viva Barnes Law, and that's where you can find it. Or think, Viva Las Vegas, Viva Barnes Law.
Viva Barnes Law. However, you'll be able to find it. The link is there, and I'll put it in the pinned comment as well. And Archiver rightly notes, a major problem will be PayPal, banks, MasterCard, and Visa coming after you for facilitating free speech. It's an interesting thing. So they go through Stripe, which I don't know if Stripe is better or worse than PayPal.
Well,
Yeah.
not only that, they have an arrangement that that Stripe has agreed not to control any aspect of anybody on there that's sponsored by locals, that's up on locals. So the Dave Rubin I talked to him about this a couple of years ago when he was planning it out. And so it's designed to be and they're also getting additional backups just in case. But in exchange for Stripe having first access, they have effectively agreed not to engage in any form of limitation on who can access it at this point. So it's the place that's the least likely to get speech censored or suppressed. And it reminds me of the old message boards. If people watch the TV show Halt and Catch Fire, there's one whole season that's kind of about that. And I don't remember if you did do Viva, but when I was growing up, the message boards were great. I mean, they were places where curated content of interested individuals who would otherwise never be able to meet in real life because the topic of interest was too narrow to get, say, 10,000 people in your local city. But you could get easily 10,000 people around the country or around the world. I mean, for me, it was Tennessee football, actually. But you got much more informed, intelligent conversation, like you would get like the great coffee shops of old, like the salons, like the great taverns. People forget American taverns started out as a community meeting place and what would happen is people who were not, a lot of people back then were not literate. So the people that were literate would read the newspaper, would read the books, and would read the broadsheets to the local crowd. It wasn't just a place to get drunk. It was a place to get together and organize, a place to get together and sometimes radicalize. So the goal is to recreate that incubator of change and positive growth moving forward.
All right. And Mark Gatto says, come on, get to the good stuff. Let's get to the good stuff. Cleopatra, first of all, thank you very much for the super chat. Let's get to the good stuff. Oh, and who said trolling? You make trolling sound like a bad thing. There's good trolling, but then we can see there's bad trolling. And there's just unproductive trolling where it intimidates other people into expressing themselves in a way that they otherwise would. Okay, what do we start with? Do we want to start? I just saw the super chat, so maybe we start with the latest in the Hunter Biden. The Hunter emails are provable because Posnarski used Gmail, which uses DKIM, which proves the authenticity of email sources and contents, same systems that proved Donna Brazile lied. DKIM. Okay, let's start with this. What are the latest developments in the Hunter Biden? I mean, I know the broad brushstrokes ones. The authenticity of the emails have been verified or confirmed. Apparently, some of the emails show overt introductions, so to speak, and so everyone was jumping on the videos, which I think are. I'm on Cernovich's side on this one. I think the videos are a useless distraction to some extent, but the emails show overt introductions being made, and now we know the authenticity of something of the kick ups, rather, like the share that the Sun is getting from these introductions going back up to somebody. Now that we know that this is all true, people have to start recognizing it and reporting on it accurately. Have there been any other meaningful developments in that?
I would say those are the two main ones. There's been some collateral ones involving the Southern District of New York and the FBI. So yeah, you're right. On multiple levels, the email's authenticity has been verified by people who are on the email list or who received the emails or who sent emails. In addition, there was a digital forensic test that confirmed the authenticity and the verification of the emails. And put it this way, from a trial perspective, these emails have been far more authenticated and verified than all kinds of things that get introduced at trial. So from a trial perspective, if we were in court, there would be no problem whatsoever getting the Hunter Biden laptop emails introduced into evidence.
And just so everybody appreciates that, when you want to introduce something into evidence in court, typically it takes either the sender or the recipient or someone involved in it who can attest to the date, the receipt, the authenticity of the document, the photo, the email.
That's exactly right.
And that is what we have now with, I'm mistaken his name, it's Bobulinski or something. And I'm not saying that to be mean, I just can't get his name, who did the interview with Tucker Carlson. Correct.
And he confirmed it. There was, I believe, another individual who's confirmed it. And then there was a digital forensic expert who also confirmed it. So by every measurement or metric for determining whether something is authentic, and authenticity is the evidentiary test if we were in court, this more than passes all of that. So that's really no longer a credible claim for the critics of the Hunter Biden evidence to try to sustain. If they made that objection in a trial, they would lose the evidentiary objection. The second component is, okay, then now we know this is for real. What does that mean? The interesting thing there is what's been new about been released. It's apparent that while Joe was very careful about never, always in cash, never in writing, apparently everybody around Joe was not so careful. Not only was Hunter emailing all the time, he was emailing high-ranking officials. He was getting lists of what people to talk to. It's a much more organized and sophisticated lobbying campaign, put it this way, than what Paul Manafort, the evidence they had against Paul Manafort engaging in foreign agent lobbying, more than they had against General Flynn's son, more than they had against the other person being charged connected to Flynn's case. In all of those instances, they had less evidence than they have against Hunter Biden. And then the third part is what you mentioned in terms of substantive evidence, that there's more evidence implicating Biden directly in it, not only receiving money from the deals, but people around him being more knowledgeable. This wasn't just a case of somebody hoping they might get access to Joe Biden. There's more and more evidence that they clearly did get access to Joe Biden and to all the things that Biden could deliver, including contact points with other individuals. More and more evidence that everything related to impeachment was really about Biden, the people connected to Biden covering up for Biden's corruption, because there's more and more evidence. What was clear to me then, but now is less able to be refuted, which is that, in fact, Burisma hired Hunter Biden to make sure that Joe Biden shut down the criminal investigation by the Ukrainian authorities into Burisma. And there's more evidence that Obama's administration helped facilitate that fact by the contacts and communications that are on the email list.
And now what I was going to ask you was time frame for this. I was talking with someone who says, "Oh, this happened after Joe left office. He was no longer VP." That's factually incorrect. This was stuff that was going on during his tenure as VP specifically.
Absolutely. In fact, it all took off while he was VP. While there had always been his family getting rich while he was a United States senator in positions like political consulting jobs and lobbying jobs and getting on bank and business boards and Amtrak deals and all that kind of jazz. Went to an entirely different level while he was vice president. Most of the most problematic aspects of this, or in fact, I'd say 90% of them, are while he was president. And now that's part one. Part two is, like the Clinton Foundation, why would anyone pay any money to any person connected to the Biden family after he leaves office, if not either to A, reward him for what he did while in office, or B, with the expectation, like the Clinton Foundation, which continued to get tons of money while Hillary had left the Secretary of State's office for the next 4 years, but it was with the anticipation that she would be elected president. And so that's the reason why Biden I told people back in 2016 he was going to let people think he was going to run to keep the cash cow coming, and then to let people. And I thought he was actually, just up until 2020, he was just doing it to keep the cash cow coming. I didn't think he would actually run. That part surprised me because of what everybody can tell with his cognitive capacity limitations, and that had clearly deteriorated over the prior 4 years. But I guarantee you, like the Clinton Foundation, if Biden loses on Tuesday, and I believe he will lose on Tuesday, but if he loses on Tuesday, you're going to see all of a sudden that cash disappear. All those jobs his brother's getting and his son is getting are going to be gone.
People don't necessarily appreciate this either, because I was reading up on how Joe made his money. They're talking about how he made $170,000 a year while he was in office, and then in the 2 years after he left, he made twice as much as he ever made while in office. And they say, "Oh, yeah, it was for the book." It's a book that he and his wife wrote. $8 million, I think it was either an advance or royalties. Another $3 million, I think it was, doing the math, in speaking fees, arrangements after he left office, with the potential understanding that he would probably return to office at a later date. And so these people saying that this is not corruption, or this is not laundering, those might be strong words. To suggest that this is not pay to play somehow, either thanking after the fact or warming up in advance. You have to wonder how someone can go from a life in office and then make twice as much in their 2 years after they leave office than they've made in their entire lives. But going back to the kids now, or to Hunter. So my understanding is he's making introductions for Hunter to get jobs with Ukrainian oil companies, I don't know what the companies were in China, where he's making millions. I mean, if it's not tens of thousands, what is it, 83,000 a month for one company. He's getting millions into his consulting firm and other companies. What are the details? You know what he was getting from China, specifically what he was getting from the Ukraine?
So the Ukraine was in the millions a year. Moscow was in the millions, and then from the Moscow mayor's family. But from China, it was a potential $1 billion deal. Now that would be split up amongst various investment partners. The China one probably it was the most potentially problematic because some of the people he was connected to were stealing military secrets from the United States. And it appears that may have been the entire goal. The whole goal may have been for Biden's company. And this is where I do recommend people watch the Biden Dragon story on Blaze TV, available on YouTube. It's about a 45-minute documentary by Peter Schweitzer, who's one of the last investigative reporters in the country. And he'll go into detail about the China part in particular. And basically, it looked like China was trying to buy influence. Certain people were trying to buy influence within the Chinese government by having influence in the U.S. government. One of them ended up being criminally prosecuted for all kinds of fraud, just like the Ukrainian people connected were accused of fraud, just as the Moscow Russian folks have been accused of fraud. So it's not just they're involved with foreign leaders or people that are foreign oligarchs, but often foreign oligarchs who had corruption problems in their own country and trying to leverage U.S. access to either mitigate that or to expand their corruption. But what's interesting is, so a couple of these people end up getting caught. And one of the ways Hunter Biden ended up early on the radar screen, though I have every reason to believe the Obama administration knew exactly what was going on, but was one of the people he gets caught. One of the first people he calls after he gets caught is he wants to put a call. He is Joe Biden's brother. And this is, a high-ranking Chinese official accused of a wide range of criminal behavior, or a high-ranking Chinese, quasi-oligarch that gets caught in the United States with involved with various criminal activities, including, in some cases, stealing military secrets. What's interesting is magically, guess which district ends up also in control of all these cases?
I'm going to take one guess. 4 letters. SDNY.
Yes, indeed. SDNY. Just as SDNY magically ends up in control of all the corruption scandals involving Devin Archer, who are connected to Hunter Biden's business plans and activities, the people connected to the Chinese illicit activities also somehow end up getting prosecuted in the Southern District of New York. And miraculously, they managed to keep the Biden family out of it entirely, even when one of the Chinese suspects was immediately calling out to Joe Biden's brother, asking for contact points to Hunter Biden, believing clearly that he had certain political protection and connections.
The Chinese individuals who were accused in SDNY, did they end up going to jail?
I believe one of them did, for sure. Yes, I think I'm doing like a 10-year sentence. But it's fascinating how all of these people, and that's where the Devin Archer case took weird turns, where you had Dan Abrams' sister, who's married to a Mueller prosecutor, oversee the trial and then set the verdict aside, and then the Second Circuit had to reinstate the verdict. And not long after that happened, Devin Archer and other people connected to it. It's probably not a coincidence that's the time frame for a lot of this information coming out. Whatever the story was with the laptop, they provided confirmation of the key allegations that were in the laptop. So now another caveat to all this, I was talking with some folks on a little YouTube show called The Gaggle, which has people from all around the world, Irish people, Hungarians, people that are in Russia, you name it. But I was mentioning, I said, who would have been much more effective getting the Hunter Biden story out? Steve Bannon does a okay job, but not great. Rudy, God bless his soul. I don't know how he presented an opening statement in court, but man, he's just all over the place. So I even tried to watch his presentation. I was like, man, I just can't. It's like, he's like that old guy that just constantly changes his story about 5 minutes in. You know what I mean? Like, which can be fun, but it's not helpful for knowing a story.
I suspect he was more focused in the younger years, and now it's sort of the. No, I don't want to say Abe Simpson type meandering, but it's more storytelling now, which meanders. But I suspect
exactly. It's hard. You have to go back and take notes 5 times to figure out what the heck the story is. But who would have been extremely effective, who would have been able to validate these things quickly, and who merely by the fact that he authenticated it would have been considered validated right away. The most effective person at disclosing government corruption in a way that's transparent, authentic, and effective over the past 10 years has been Julian Assange. So the fact that they indicted Julian Assange prevented WikiLeaks from being they would have been the natural source for all this. And then we would have been able to search it ourselves to figure out what's on the data in the emails. You would have had true crowdsourcing of investigative work, like what happened with the WikiLeaks emails, where a lot of information got disclosed much quicker and much more effectively. It would have been WikiLeaks has never they have never been caught a single time putting out a false document. I mean, it's extraordinary the authentication mechanisms they go to. So it's mighty convenient that not only did impeachment distract from all of this, it turned out the FBI had all this for over a year, knew there was potential money laundering, everything else, did nothing with it, tried to bury it, tried to hide it, knew it was authentic all along. But the fact that they got Julian Assange tied up, I told people at the time, this is done so that Assange and WikiLeaks cannot be helpful to Trump in terms of dealing with institutional corruption. And as in fact, this story was 10 times less effective because Julian Assange was in prison.
I mean, it's an interesting, I would say, I'm able to identify when you hypothesize. And it's an interesting theory because it would be a question of very playing the long game, chess game on this one, knowing that this might have come up in 2020. So it is interesting, though, when you lose the WikiLeaks source, a platform where people can access it themselves and authenticate it themselves and crowdsource the knowledge themselves. Yeah, we're looking at Giuliani on Steven Crowder opening up a laptop. We're looking at an interview with Tucker Carlson that most people are going to not take serious. Most people who don't like Tucker Carlson or don't like that side are not going to take seriously because they're just going to call it partisan whatever. At the very least, it seemed that everyone hated Julian Assange and WikiLeaks to some extent, and those who loved him, were able to do the work that he was facilitating and had a untarnished track record as far as accuracy goes. But someone actually asked a question, and I missed it, but I'm going to take a picture of it if my phone lets me. It was Isaac Castillo. Oh, no, he said biodynamics failed the first time. Biden doesn't need projections to tell voters what career policies will yield significant growth. That wasn't the one. The comment was, Edwin Lee, love you guys. Do you think there's enough of a case for criminal prosecution of Joe Biden if Trump stays in office? This is my question. Can't for the life of me figure out how, joking about the simulation, this happens again. It's not it's a laptop, it's emails, it's the FBI or the DOJ confirming an FBI investigation a week to the election, like Comey did last time. Why do they confirm the existence of an investigation that was opened in 2019?
I mean, my guess is that what they're trying to do is it's now CYA mode. They're trying to say that, no, we were investigating or we are investigating. The other reason they would say they're investigating is to try to shut down FOIA requests and a bunch of other things. So because as long as there's an open investigation, they don't have to actually do anything and they don't have to disclose anything about what they did or did not do. So that's my assumption about what took place and what transpired. So and I think they took out Assange not necessarily in anticipation of the Biden aspects directly. It was just that there's been nobody better outing the deep state than Julian Assange, maybe in American or world history, of consistently outing corrupt governments around the world. And they knew if you take out Assange, then something like this, if it pops up, will be nowhere nearly as effective and impactful.
Yeah, there's no question. I remember the wiki dump the last time in 2016, and just everyone on the internet had access to it and was able to do their own what's the word, promotion, publication, republication, sharing, and it's true. It's crazy. This with the absence of Assange, now that you mentioned it, the absence of WikiLeaks and the addition of the suppression on Twitter and Facebook, I mean, you have to be looking for this information in order to know it exists, and even educated people will largely be unaware of the existence, and if they're aware of the existence, largely unaware of the scope of what was involved in it. It's an interesting thing, though. If the FBI is getting scared, wants to cover their butts, is it the same type of thing? Like they're no longer as certain that Hillary's going to win and shield them post-election as they were Biden getting elected, shielding them post-election now? Like, is there internal sentiment within these institutions that it's looking more likely that it's going to be a Trump re-election and the hammer coming down on what should have been done a year ago?
I think they're uncertain, and so they're just covering themselves for the time being, and then wait and see. It's clear now that the Durham, of course, never issued a report. Never. There are some people are saying it was going to happen the weekend before Election Day. So everybody out there, what I forecast on here for what is it now? 8 months, 9 months,
Easy.
however.
Easy.
Yeah. Is that nothing was going to happen and nothing happened. And so this is why I strongly support the pardon of Julian Assange as well as Ed Snowden, but particularly Ed Snowden, because it's going to tell whistleblowers they can blow the whistle on illicit government activities and be protected. Real whistleblowers, not the fake ones like the New York Times had, where they used basically a guy that was practically an intern and pretended he was a high-ranking government official as anonymous. Turned out he's just a political hack who loves war. But someone real like Ed Snowden, who was probably the most important whistleblower in American history, other than maybe Daniel Ellsberg, but really probably more so than Ellsberg in many respects. But Julian Assange was critical to outing deep state corruption. So whatever you think about him, the reality, if you believe in and support transparency and investigative reporting into your government, the only man who has done it effectively in my lifetime has been Julian Assange. And the Hunter Biden story should remind you as to why he's so important. Because the reason why half the world hasn't heard of it and the rest of them just discard it is because Assange wasn't there to make it accessible to everybody.
No, and to write it off as they did in the early stages as Russian disinformation, and then the Department of National Intelligence confirms it. And I still hear very intelligent people repeating, this is Russian disinformation. It's just like, it's the catch-all. It's just the voluntary flicking off of the switch of critical thinking in the brain. Russian disinformation. I no longer have to look at non-judgmentally at Hunter Biden as an individual. A lot of people were giving me flack last week because I said, he's the son. He's I was treating him like a child. Some people said, but the reality is everybody has their problems. It's not a question of Hunter Biden's personal problems. It's a question of what was facilitated by and as a result of political connections, and how this is not the exact same accusation of the quid pro quo that they were trying to impeach Trump on steroids. It's outlandish, and it's black and white. It's undeniable for anybody who's following it, but I can say from own conversations I've had with people, large swaths of people, educated people, 1 in 10 know anything about it, which means that there's not a lot of people. There's a lot more people we can have watching the live streams. Everyone here watching has known about the legalities of the laptop and all the beautiful stuff about it. What is the political downside for Trump if he pardons Assange and Snowden? I mean, I guess
it's just the deep state hates the more than they even hate Trump and almost all the deep state apparatus for which that the outing of Anonymous this week. For people who don't know that backstory, the New York Times put this anonymous high-ranking government official, according to them, disclosing all these terrible things that Trump was doing, and it turned out Anonymous was a nobody. But he's one of the minions of the deep state apparatus. Minions, also a great movie for it's more of a cartoon show. Doesn't relate to deep state, but just a little plug. But this guy reflects that kind of minions mindset, just doing whatever the sort of deep state apparatus wants ideologically and politically. They hate Julian Assange. They hate Ed Snowden and all the deep states of the world combined, all the intelligence agencies, all the politicized law enforcement, all the national security apparatus or military industrial complex, whatever verbiage you want to use for them. The institutional actors who have disproportionate influence in areas of intelligence, law enforcement, and the military hate Julian Assange because of what he represents, and hate Ed Snowden because of what he represents. Not just because of what they've successfully achieved, but because they represent, hey, you can act on your conscience and expose corruption in our government. You can create independent, crowdsourced journalism that's outside of any editorial or censorial control and have meaningful change in the world, as Julian Assange did. That's what terrifies them about both of them. They want both of them to suffer horrific personal consequences because they don't want anyone else to ever stick their head up again. It relates to a great history professor, a great historian, the book right behind me in the left, The Contours of American History by Mr. William Appleman Williams. And the reason why it's a great text, and it's a great book all the way across the board, you can see the photo of it, is because he goes how often our foreign policy elites would be obsessed with very tiny governments and countries like Cuba, for example. But long before Cuba, there were other ones they were obsessed with because they saw them as exemplars of a different set of behavior around the world. And so they would obsess over a Panama. They obsessed over some tiny little country. Like, why do you care? Because for them, they knew the example of somebody who would be willing to challenge empire, the institutional prerogatives of empire, like, say, Allende in Guatemala in the 1950s. Then if they did so, they could spread their ideology. And it's because they understand our own history. America was this little backwater that decided to rebel against its empire in the late 1700s. And before then, we didn't have a bunch of democracies around the world. Freedom of speech wasn't an idea shared around the world. Freedom of thought wasn't an idea shared around the world. Freedom of religion, sure as heck, was not an idea shared around the world. Freedom of all of the core freedoms that we consider foundational and fundamental, the right to a jury trial, the right to have bail, all of these ideas that are the right to have a jury decide your guilt or innocence, the right not to have to incriminate yourself. All of these core American rights created in America started because of the example of America. This tiny little country showed you could change the entire world. And that's what Julian Assange showed. That's what Ed Snowden showed. That's why they hate him. That's why if Trump is going to be consistent to his principles, he needs to pardon him. He's only stopped doing so to date because the deep state apparatus doesn't want it to occur.
So, I mean, hypothetically, re-election, he has much more freedom, or does he wait until last year of his second term if he's reelected?
Well, I've been telling everybody around Trump has always been very open and overt that he believes in payback. And I've been saying, look, the people that have been waging war on him for 4 years is this deep state institutional apparatus. If I was there's one way to pay those people back more than any other, and that would be to pardon Julian Assange and Ed Snowden. That would be the Bill Kristols of the world, all the corrupt actors, the Brennans, the Clappers. Hillary Clinton wanted to drone bomb Julian Assange. The best way to pay that whole corrupt apparatus that's trying to corrode corrosively the core of our democratic freedoms and institutions in America would be to pardon Julian Assange and Ed Snowden. So I think he didn't do it up until the election because he was trying a détente with his opponents. But I think once the election is over, no matter how the election goes, he should take action and pardon the two of them to pay those folks back for what they got coming.
That is actually I'm just pulling up. I love Barnes' perspective, and that is a good way to look at it. One way or the other, he's either empowered through re-election or he is declawed through non-re-election. Not declawed, but rather, what is the word when you disinhibited through not being re-elected? We're over 10,000 viewers. This is amazing, everybody. Now here, this is the real question. Do we like this or do we like this better? And then if I bring up a comment, pardon Stone Assange, do we like this format better?
I mean, are we asking the audience?
Well, what do you think, Robert? I'll ask you first.
I like both. I kind of like this one better. Okay. I know some people, it depends on the size of their screen, I guess. But I mean, I like this one better because it allows for the super chat to be beneath the conversation.
Not overriding. Okay, we'll keep it like this for the next session, and then we'll go back maybe if people find this annoying. I see a lot of people saying no.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go back. Let's go back. We're closer to each other and to the audience. Okay, now it's obviously the opportune time. Elections updates. This is something that I'm not following at all because I don't know where to start. There's too much for me to even try to. So fill in the crowd. Last week, we were talking about the extensions to count ballots post-election. We were waiting for a Supreme Court decision last week, which did not come down.
Exactly. Like we talked about in the show. It was clear that Barrett apologists were already putting out an advance warning, basically encouraging her. And for folks that don't know this, a lot of these intellectual types and political types are really communicating to judges when they're writing their little op-eds or opinion pieces. Often their audience is not you or me. Their audience is, say, a Judge Sullivan. And notice how well it worked in that case. So he wasn't writing an editorial to the world. It had one audience, but it would be at least inappropriate to communicate ex parte with them. So you just write an editorial in the Washington Post. He reads. So Shipwrecked Crew, was one of these people who had been attacking me personally for disagreeing about Barrett. And I found that weird. And I was like, okay, this guy must be a Barrett apologist to be part of the establishment. He also was predicting Durham was going to bring indictments and all this other stuff. Never happened. Almost as if it was deliberate misinformation by people like him. Keep people on the hook. Hey, everybody, don't worry. Keep Trump at bay. The indictments are right around the corner. It's always been my problem with Q, is that it tends to disincentivize people's independent investigative work and activism because they think everything's under control when it's not. So he put out, and that was part of it. And I referenced it last Sunday. I said, watch. All of these people, I can guarantee you, Trump was specifically promised that Barrett would be a yes vote for him on elections as the deal that sealed the deal for her to be nominated over other people. She gets nominated. Then right after her confirmation vote, the news story, all of a sudden these little opinion pieces leaked, started coming out, which I think were written to her, not written for us, which were, probably shouldn't even, probably should recuse yourself from these cases. It might look bad if you jump in right now. And that's what I talked about last Sunday. I'd seen some of these pieces because I tracked these people. And I was like, I bet that despite what Trump had been promised, she's going to find an excuse not to rule on the election cases. And that's exactly what happened. So all those people that said, oh, she's the greatest justice and I hope she ends up being a great justice, of course. But there were a lot of warning signs like this. I mean, the one person who put her there is President Trump. And it's the first person she betrays when she gets on the bench. What does that tell you about her character, folks? Anybody banking on her is banking on, might as well, double down on Justice Roberts. So
I was going to be more inclined to forgive. Now, from what I understood, the argument was that she could not be debriefed fast enough to issue an opinion.
That makes no sense because this was an emergency injunctive release that they refiled solely because they knew she was now back on the. There was no reason to refile it. It had already been turned down 4-4. So there's no reason to refile unless you're doing it for her. So they refile, and it's just an emergency injunctive motion. So all you do is read the emergency injunction motion. And by the way, that excuse was the very excuse her apologists were using 2 days before she got on the bench. They were saying, here's what it was only being leaked, put in certain circles and then spread a little bit wider. But they were saying, oh, probably it's too late for you to really get involved in this. So it's mighty interesting that she mimicked the language they were giving her to use. But it makes no sense. This was just an emergency injunctive relief. They only refiled it because she was on the bench. So they clearly thought she was going to rule on it. And in terms of what she had to do, like somebody were saying, oh, it's a whole, this was not a petition for cert. This wasn't a situation where she didn't participate in the initial vote on the petition for cert. And in that context, you're usually not supposed to be involved in deciding an issue because it's respecting the initial vote process is what's happening there. This was not this was just an emergency injunctive relief that they simply refiled after she was appointed solely for the purpose for her to vote on it.
So explain to the layperson then what happens. She says, I can't be debriefed. I'm not going to issue a judgment. What happens to the original judgment, and what is the original judgment, or what is the standing judgment now?
It then basically goes back to the original 4-4 split. So without her changing the vote, being the tipping factor, the prior vote became binding effectively. I mean, it's not like binding. It just means no reason to keep filing your emergency injunctive relief. If it was really the case she wanted more briefing, she could have asked for more briefing. The folks, all this was reading about 100 pages. That's all that it required. She wanted it to be done proper and correct. Man, you got sucker tattooed on your forehead if you believe that. So again, they didn't refile it because they thought she would recuse herself. They would, and if she wanted a couple of extra days, she could have done that. She said she basically, whatever message she sent to the other justices, their conclusion was not, hey, let's postpone it a couple of days. Let's have additional briefing. It was, nothing's going to happen now between now and election day, because since then they decided to stay out of it altogether. And instead, the problem with people saying, oh, it's better if she waits until after the election to get involved. That's much worse and much less likely the courts are going to get involved. It's one thing to try to stop something from happening before it happens. It's another thing to try to actually throw out ballots. The Democrats are going to go insane if they try to throw out ballots. There was major problems after Bush v. Gore, and it will be tenfold intense if that happens again. So could she still possibly rule in a way that helps, that saves the election from Trump? Yes. but it's much less likely to occur. She allowed Pennsylvania to keep doing what they're doing, allowed North Carolina to keep doing.
Refresh my memory and refresh everybody's memory who's watching. Pennsylvania now can count. What is it? Can they count ballots up until a week after the election?
In Pennsylvania, it's 3 days. So 3 things can happen. One, if any ballot comes in within 3 days by the end of next week, then it has to be presumed to have been sent correctly, unless there's a postmark that clearly, irrefutably shows it wasn't sent timely, and it has to count. Now, the Pennsylvania Attorney General made a smart move of saying he'll segregate those ballots from the other ballots, so if the issue comes back up, they'll know which ones are which. But what he knows is his argument's 100 times stronger when he's got 100,000 ballots there. Because what Democrats are saying, oh my goodness, Trump's trying to steal it. He wants to throw out 100,000 ballots, like is what's happening right now in a Texas case.
And now I saw Pete Buttigieg tweet that. I wasn't exactly familiar with what the accusation was. What is the nature of that accusation?
Yeah. So all right. So for just to wrap up Pennsylvania, the other thing is, they cannot even check the signature. So right now, unsigned ballots can show up, or signatures that clearly don't even get close to matching the original signature. So they can be it's the only check on fraud. So hundreds of thousands, millions of ballots can show up after Election Day without a postmark showing it was sent before Election Day, as long as there's nothing saying otherwise, without it being properly signed, and they will be counted as of now in the Pennsylvania presidential election because of Barrett's refusal to act. Now, in Houston, in Harris County, Texas, they put certain places to gather ballots that Republicans claim they didn't have legal authority to do. There's some other claims that are part of that case. And about 120,000 ballots are subject to dispute about whether they were properly placed in the place that they should have been in for the purposes of being counted. And so they have on Monday an emergency hearing on what's going to happen. And what's happening in some of these test cases, here's my view. I'll give Republican perspective. The Republican perspective is Democrats are seeing what they can get away with. And so in some cities and some counties, they've pushed the envelope. Pennsylvania, they pushed the envelope through the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. In Harris County, they pushed the envelope about how they could gather ballots in the first place. And it's because of an underlying problem. African-American urban turnout is much less than what they thought it would be. Despite vote by mail was supposed to substitute for the lack of enthusiasm in the African-American and Hispanic communities. It didn't work. And so there's a belief on the Republican side that Democrats are now just trying to stuff ballots. Because here's the problem. If you have a place where ballots were placed, the concern is ballot harvesting taking place. And this goes to Project Veritas. It was in Texas that they found people saying undercover. So they found people in Minnesota paying people to register, paying people to do ballots, who appeared to have been engaged in ballot harvesting more than what was legal in Minnesota. Then in Houston, there's the lawsuit. And in other part of Texas, Project Veritas found somebody undercover going around effectively harvesting ballots when they weren't supposed to be doing that. And for people who don't know what ballot harvesting is, it's someone acting as an intermediary between the voter and the election board. They're picking up the ballot.
The argument for ballot harvesting, from what I understand, is that people are doing it for the elderly who can't displace themselves to deliver their ballots. So they go harvest the ballots and then, I guess, plant them at the electoral office or whatever. But it's always cloaked in good intentions. And I'm not suggesting that there are nefarious intentions all the time, because undoubtedly there are good intentions. So that's it. It's picking up for people who can't deliver them for whatever the reason.
Exactly. And the Democratic perspective is that the more people that voting should be as easy as possible, because the more people that vote, now they'll admit this, politically it benefits them. But even if it didn't, they think that's a more honest expression of democracy. So like I got into a debate on Twitter with a journalist out of Florida who was enraged about not being able to have ballots come in after Election Day. And this was not Florida, but it happened in Minnesota. So what happened in Minnesota and Michigan, the court shut down. Any ballots have to come in by Election Day. Wisconsin, same deal. Seventh Circuit stepped in, said no, it has to come in by Election Day. And the Eighth Circuit did the same thing to Minnesota this week. They said all ballots have to come in by election day. Now, what they said is if any ballot does not come in by election day, it should be segregated, not destroyed, just segregated.
Just in case there's an adjudication that says we know which ones came in late, we know which ones came in before definitively, so we'll debate over the lesser amount. In theory, we might even know if the numbers are going to be so insignificant that they're not going to alter anything, and in which case it becomes academic to some extent.
Yep. Exactly, correct. And so the concern in Texas, and so all the concerns on the Republican side is that this facilitates fraud because there's no gatekeeper. And by the way, it was actually a Republican person who got caught doing this in North Carolina. Not in a Republican Democrat race, but within a Republican primary, was doing illicit ballot harvesting. And the question is, how do we know a vote came from that person? And then how do we know that vote was their honest expression of conscience, not the product of bribery, not the product of coercion? Well, the main way that's where we have the witness signature requirement, somebody to witness the person filling out the ballot. The signature requirement, I have to sign it and it has to match my signature on my voter registration file. And I have to request it and I have to deliver it. The more you reduce those safeguards, the more fraud is easier to occur. From the Democratic perspective, they're just making it easier for people to vote. And that all these hindrances just make it harder for people to vote, and particularly poor and lower income communities. From the Republican perspective, these measurements are necessary to substitute for it. And generally, I lean on Republican on a lot, even though I've done a lot of the Democratic arguments in some of these contexts. I do think we need another method other than signatures because there's a problem with people not remembering their signatures. As people's signatures change over time. So that really is a problem. And I'm sympathetic to the Democratic perspective on that. But that's what my view is. Go in and vote. We've been doing this for 200 plus years in America, thousands of years around the world. You walk in, you go physically and vote. And if you're disabled, they have to make mechanisms available to you to make sure you can vote. The idea that people can't, that somehow COVID magically prevents people from voting is something I've just have never accepted.
There's a number of things I've never understood. From what I understand, everybody outside of America, voter ID here, I've mentioned it multiple times, voter ID, proof of residence, nobody complains. And there's no arguments of systemic racism resulting from that. The idea that, there are exceptions, but that you bring in the ballot box to individual residences versus having the residents come to the ballot box obviously has problems, and exceptions aside, a system should be in place. But no, look, we know the arguments. It's the traditional arguments. Everything is always cloaked in good intentions. And even if the intentions are true good intentions, the road to hell is paved in good intentions because there's always negative players out there who are going to take advantage of the path of least resistance for their nefarious deeds, and softening up the rules to make it easy for everyone to vote makes it easy for people to manipulate the vote. We don't really have that problem. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and to fraudulently vote. Like I mentioned last week, Bill Clinton thought it happened all the time. So why does he think that if vote fraud never occurs? Like the myth that the left repeats is they'll say vote fraud never occurs. The myth that the right repeats is that vote suppression never occurs. Both occur because both sides are trying to get an edge. And historically, that's always been the case. So we want the most fair, free, transparent elections possible, for which the best method we've ever known, the Australian secret ballot, works the best. People come in person, get to vote in secret. In Nevada, I loved it. I walked in and they print out. Actually, they didn't let me keep the receipt. Maybe they never did. Maybe I always thought that was the case. But what is they print it out so that after you do your ballot, you get to cross-check and make sure it's correct. And you can correct it if the computer got something wrong, anything else going wrong. But it's showing you what's going into the computer system. Now, that doesn't necessarily prevent some other kind of hacking from occurring, but it's at least the most. I was like, this is the way it should work. This is transparent. This is totally safe and protected. This is secret. This is confidential. This is anonymous. Coercion can't happen. Fraud can't happen. Now, they don't require my ID. They require like date of birth and some other stuff. But my view is they should require ID. Now, my sister witnessed an incident where someone had a passport. The passport had expired. Person didn't let them vote. They do what's called a supplemental ballot, or the language may vary in certain places. A provisional ballot is what it's called most places. And what is, you're allowed to vote. It's put in a different place. If you come in later and prove your ID, then they have your ballot count. But she witnessed a situation where someone was probably overly restrictive with ID. And given that the people involved were African American, was concerned that racial prejudice may have played a role. So there's no question voter suppression has historically occurred. It still occurs. There's also no question that voter fraud occurs, and historically has occurred. So
someone actually just posted, like, voter fraud doesn't have to be widespread to be a problem. It in fact has to be very minimally spread. But what do you think? 1%, 0.5%?
Yeah. Well, my view is to succeed, to get away with it. I think Roy Moore's election had a lot of voter fraud involved, but everybody hated Roy Moore in Alabama in the judiciary, so nobody was going to do anything about it. Here's the hard part for people out there. So on election, how would you be able to tell whether voter fraud took place? The thing is, we have jurisdictions in America that have like groups vote alike in America. So say urban, lower income African-American voters, so Mexican-American voters, they can vary depending on location, but not a whole lot. But let's certain white voter groups, other places. But if you're measuring, the biggest fear about voter suppression is lower income African-American voters. And the biggest fear of voter fraud is padding the ballots and claiming that lower income African-American voters voted. So that's where it's on both sides. And if you go back through American history, like the way a lot of this originated was when the slaves were freed in the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s. This is actually kind of portrayed in Free State of Jones, where they try to vote and they suppress the vote. The flip side also happened. There were a lot of, purportedly in parts of Alabama, a bunch of ex-slaves voted to disenfranchise themselves in the future. Chances are that was not an accurate count of the ballot. Now, you did have literacy issues, so maybe they were misled, but something happened that wasn't accurate. But that's where a lot of these concerns originated and arose. The focus in some places is Mexican-American West Texas has been a history of a source of allegations of both voter suppression and voter fraud. But the thing is, because those like groups are around the country, if you have very low turnout amongst African-American voters in Miami and Jacksonville and in Columbia, South Carolina, in parts of the Tar Heel country part of North Carolina, or in sort of rural southern areas, or in urban areas like, say, Cleveland in Ohio, or Indianapolis in Indiana. If Philadelphia has the highest African-American urban turnout in the entire country by a large margin, all Democrats know there's going to be a suspicion of voter fraud. If on the flip side, if they have unusually low turnout, then there's going to be legitimate concerns about voter suppression. So basically they tend to vote very similar. So like the way in Roy Moore's case, the way I knew that I actually set out to prove that voter fraud did not occur. And I for people who don't know, I used to do political campaigns when I was a kid. So I've been doing that for about 30 years. I ran a mayoral campaign of an African-American candidate in my hometown, Chattanooga. We almost won. And I suspected that the voter fraud was the difference between a runoff and not having a runoff, because we missed it by 3 points. And on election night, it was just half a point, 1 point to get a runoff. And the difference was the early voting. And the early voting was a lot of African-American voters who didn't vote for the African-American candidate for mayor, which did not make sense. And they were part of a political machine who were being bussed to the polls by the Democratic political machine that I was up against. And 2 years later, the people that were involved in that voter organization effort ended up in prison on a different fraud scheme. So I've witnessed voter fraud. I have zero doubts about it occurring. But you can measure it and check it by looking at like precincts. When I went to prove Roy Moore voter fraud did not occur, I just compared like precincts. So heavily Democratic urban African-American precincts in Birmingham, because the way voter fraud happens on that scale is it tends to be really just whoever runs the precinct sticks in a bunch of extra votes. And if they're smart and they're not lazy like the ones in Detroit were in 2016, they make sure to check off the signatures of just a bunch of people that didn't actually vote, but they know no one's who's going to cross-check whether they actually voted that day. How do you prove they didn't vote that day? And it's an overwhelmingly Democratic vote group, so it's not like they're going to be mad that someone claimed they voted when they didn't. So but what happens is, because it tends to be precinct driven, one precinct will show unusual turnout, and a precinct right down the street will not show that unusual turnout. That's what happened in Roy Moore's case. So you had precincts that voted at almost 95% of the presidential level. Down the street, one that voted at about 60, which was the norm, 60 to 65% of the presidential vote. And that happened all across Birmingham and all over Alabama. Now, this one will be a little different because the ballot stuffing could happen at the post office by a postal employee, by someone that delivers it to the post office in such a way that it's not distinct to any particular precinct. But you'll still be able to compare if Pittsburgh African-American urban vote is, say, down 10% relative to 2016, and North Philadelphia is up 40%, you're going to know there was probably an issue. So that's why I say voter fraud, to be effective and not get caught, needs to be less than a point.
Yeah, but I mean, first of all, how do you go back and prove that after the fact, just because of discrepancies among districts? You'd go cross-check the ballots with the signatures, and
you have to really try to investigate. You have to find out who did it. So the data tells you that it likely occurred. Then you have to, but the hard part of having to prove it is you've got to go cross-check and find people. If they screw up, they voted for someone who died. That would be the evident one, right? So dead people vote. And sometimes they do that. As I say, it depends on the correct, like here, to give you how bad it was in Detroit, when they were doing the recount vote, because Democrats had funded Jill Stein, paid off her debt in order to get her to do recounts. The reason why they suddenly stopped everybody and everything, all of a sudden that whole story disappeared overnight, is because in Detroit, they were finding precincts with more votes than voters. Someone had been too lazy to check off the list. Now, that's another way you can prove voter fraud. If there's more votes than voters, then you got pretty good evidence.
Yeah, that's actually, I'm trying to pull up the comment where a few people were saying you get more than 100% turnout in certain districts, but I can't pull up anyone. I can't find those comments now. And let me just get rid of this one. Okay, so the bottom line now, the Pennsylvania, Texas, the issues are going to be whether or not they're going to be counting ballots that come in after the election, and whether or not they're going to be counting ballots that do not have a definitive pre-election postmark on them. And that's going to be the same question in Texas as well?
Yes. Well, no, in Texas, a little bit different. Texas is about how the vote went from the person who voted to the election commission. It's about a drop box. I don't know all the details about it, but they're going to have a hearing on it Monday. And what's interesting is all the liberals who tell me that judges don't make rulings based on politics are all enraged because the judge that got assigned the case is a conservative Republican in the county. So
it is amazing. It's amazing. Well, it's just back to projection again. It's a pathological thing. Okay, now I think it's a good segue into Project Veritas and the lawsuit, and more specifically, the defamation lawsuit against the New York Times. I've read the lawsuit, as we say in French, en diagonale. It was 72 pages. It's a long lawsuit. But I mean, the bottom line of the lawsuit is that the New York Times comes out with a piece, among other. God, I sent you the link, a Fox News report, where to refer to Project Veritas as a disinformation, what do they call them? Not a campaign, but they refer to, say that again?
I think it was misinformation, wasn't it?
Misinformation. They call them a group of misinformation, something along those lines. Basically, write them off from the beginning so that they have no credibility or standing as far as any analysis goes afterwards. It was Fox News also, which was kind of interesting. Bottom line, we know of the Project Veritas has done a number of exposés. I was actually critical of one of their exposés, which was the COVID testing in the field. I didn't think that was their strongest piece, or strongest piece in terms of methodology. They came up with an exposé in Minnesota, in Ilhan Omar's district, showing fraudulent ballot harvesting or allegedly fraudulent ballot harvesting. An individual who named himself and who posted this himself on his own social media, talking about how he's getting paid to stuff ballots. He's basically getting paid to. I'm missing the details now. Getting paid
to both bribe people to cast ballots, and he was illicitly harvesting ballots.
Okay, and now one of the arguments is going to be that the law in virtue of which it was allegedly illegal to harvest the ballots had been suspended, or execution of the law had been suspended, so what he was doing wasn't illegal. Whether or not it was in fact illegal, but they were suspending enforcement of the law versus not illegal is a separate question. Yeah. So they run this piece. Individuals are identified. It seems, nobody knows what they left on the editing floor. There is editing. Whether or not it's deceptive, it's going to be the core argument. New York Times comes out with a hit piece basically saying deceptive editing, unidentified sources, misinformation campaign to discredit Project Veritas's reporting. Project Veritas is now suing for defamation on the basis that these were defamatory statements that factually incorrect, done with malicious intent, and cause damages to Project Veritas. One of the quirks in the lawsuit is that apparently part of the piece on which the New York Times article is based on a blog that shows some statistics about the falsity of the story. 30,000 foot overview. Except that piece was only published something like an hour before the New York Times article itself came out, and basically the New York Times allegedly read this 10,000 word piece, drafted their own piece, talking about how it was a disinformation campaign based on the data in this blog, and published it within 60 minutes of publication of the blog. The underlying idea being that this is the evidence of the malice and the actual misinformation campaign orchestrated by the New York Times with this blog. Who did what is unclear, whether it's like a Yahoo running the story on which the FBI then uses the publication in Yahoo as justification for their court application, or which came first, we don't know. That is going to be some of the evidence of the malicious intent. So I've read it quickly. I'm not thoroughly convinced about the strength of the lawsuit, but I don't know if it's because I'm just skeptical, having seen how hard it is to succeed on a defamation claim. Do you know the attorneys in the file? Because apparently they're big players in the field.
I think it's, I haven't actually looked at the details of the suit itself. So I just followed what O'Keefe has been saying about the suit prior to that. And normally he uses the same firm. He uses there's a firm that just represents other people, but he uses one particular lawyer all across the country for almost all of his defamation and libel cases. They'll usually have some local counsel be on board as well, but he basically has his own in-house counsel on that. Now, I think that it's going to depend on some of the language and verbiage, and how much of it was an opinion, how much of it was factual. I think that's the biggest hurdle they have to overcome. But he has more retractions and corrections that he has received from the press than any journalist or newspaper or public official in the country by a long mile. I think he's up to 330 or 40. They actually have a wall of retractions. I mean, they got Newsweek to issue retractions. Like the New York Times story was the same as the Newsweek story. Fundamentally, Newsweek issued a correction. He got a bunch of other people, because one of the mistakes they made here was, I guess they didn't realize that one of the key videos he used, they didn't shoot. One of these idiots shared it on his Instagram.
Well, that's where I just get skeptical myself, is that the guy, that's where I tend to think, I would not think it's a credible video. I think it's somebody trying to get social media clout within a political community where he thinks that's going to get him clout. Like, look what I'm doing. I'm stuffing ballots. When it's actually just a blowhard making up a story, just trying to get social media points. I can view that two ways. One, it's damning admission and the individual can't take it back. Flip side, it's just some bozo trying to be bigger than he is on social media in a milieu where he knows that that's going to get social media credit. So apparently the two videos, and Robert, you probably watched what I sent you, the two videos shot by the individual, he posted himself on social media, and his argument that he gave when examined by the Fox News, whatever affiliate it was that it was maliciously or deceptively edited together, his own video, and that he was harvesting ballots for the elderly who couldn't vote. They were collecting money to send to a sick child in Somalia, which is literally the excuse he gave for why he was taking payments. But that the fact that he posted it to social media can go both ways. It can either be a damning admission, or it's just somebody tooting their own horn on social media. But they use the word deceptive video. In my mind, playing devil's advocate for the New York Times, obviously it was a deceptive video insofar as it was undercover. So, I mean, undercover, not telling the person you're recording, in a way can be deceptive to the person who doesn't know they're being recorded. Deceptively edited is different.
Yes.
And then they'll have, but that's going to be a question of opinion, I think, where it becomes not a question. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, I was just going to say, I think that to your point, New York Times would have been much better off if they used the word surreptitious. They just know that sounds like undercover reporting, and that's what they're supposed to be doing all the time. So they're trying to distinguish it in ways, and the problem with using the deceptive language for folks out there is that deception is something. The way they define the difference between a impermissible opinion and a permissible opinion when it concerns defamation is it's whether or not you're saying something a jury can determine as fact. Well, deception is something juries are asked to determine all the time, as a matter of fact, and because of consumer the deception laws and so forth. So by the New York Times, my view was the Times decided to be over aggressive, be a part because they have too many young reporters that have no qualifications to be writing for the New York Times, in my view. There was a time when the New York Times had real reporters, not just all political hacks. They were always biased, but at least they knew, a Jake Tapper wouldn't make this mistake in the way that these kids will. And then the second one is that they've just gone all in on this election cycle. So as one of the commenters noted, or one of the super chats, they've not talked about all of the corruption. The reason why O'Keefe knew he could go into Somalian culture in Minneapolis and get these kind of admissions is because it's the kind of culture that, like what you're talking about, maybe they're just bragging. But the thing is, for that culture, they're not doing anything wrong. Remember, this is a culture that's been fed by piracy for the last 20 years in the post-war era in Somalia. So you're seen as being smarter and better than other people if you're part of a crooked operation. And so they don't see it as morally, or put it this way, their culture as a whole is less likely to condemn that behavior. They see, hey, this is just how you politically get ahead. This shows you're smart.
Well, no, and I'll push back, and there's going to be a ton of people who are going to say sweeping generalization, making excuses,
yes.
and they may or may not have a point in terms of. I mean, there's an explanation, there's an interpretation, and that's yours, and a great many people are going to disagree with it. Some people are going to say they're just. I'm pulling up some of the chats, sarcastic comments, but yeah, they're just doing God's work, and this guy's just helping people vote. So yeah, I mean, it'll be the flip side of interpreting the credibility of the individual in terms of whether or not they were actually being serious or truthful. But hold on, the question that I was going to ask was, so the deceptiveness aside, that's one thing, and there'll be an argument as to whether or not it's a subjective term, a descriptive term, whether or not it's legitimate description, just given that it's undercover and any undercover video can be deceptive. When they say that unnamed sources, so they write it off and say unnamed sources, where just as a pure matter of fact, the sources in Project Veritas's piece are identified, named, face, and everything. So now making that type of factually incorrect statement, can that be sufficient to warrant a defamation claim?
They will get past a motion to dismiss. I don't have, unless they get a real bad judicial draw. I mean, because remember, Sarah Palin got past it. So, and that was an argument, though it had to go up to the Second Circuit to do so. And then of course, and Nick Salmon got past it. So this will be the New York Times, three, it won't be three's a charm. They're going to lose a third time in a row on a major libel suit because they said enough things that a jury could determine are factual, at least to get into the discovery stage of the case as to whether or not there was actual malice involved. But yeah, that's a specific fact. It's an indisputable factual assertion, and according to the allegations of the suit, completely false.
And completely false. I think it is overtly false. And the funny thing is, I've gotten so cynical. Like I read it and I say, yeah, New York Times is confirming that they're hacks. That they're just not doing any work. Yeah, did they even watch the video? That's the first question. Everybody talking about that the Trump cars trying to run Joe Biden's bus off the road. I was like, did anybody even watch the video? Because you can't watch the video and come to that conclusion. You can come to other conclusions. So they're just factually incorrect, and I just say they're idiots. But then the question is, maybe I've just gotten too cynical, where being idiots can make you a defamatory idiot as well. And they say it's an unnamed, unsourced piece to write it off so that nobody who watches the Project Veritas video will know, and they'll just take it for granted and think that Project Veritas is a misinformation campaign. Now, apparently people are telling me I'm an idiot because the individual in the video, and I was not necessarily aware of this, apparently posted it on a private Snapchat story. So it was not intended for public consumption, but rather for private things. And apparently Snapchat videos disappear after a while. So, okay, that might make me more.
And the other component of that is that there were actual ballots that were there. So in other words, there are actual ballots that they could identify and authenticate. That was their other additional evidence for that. And just in case anybody thinks I'm like hate Somalian people or something, I'm referring solely to the sort of Ilhan Omar subculture there. And my view is, it's like people often say African governments have higher levels of corruption according to various corruption metrics. The reality is all that happened was African governments and countries simply internalized values taught to them by colonial governments. And they're just more overt and open and transparent about it. Now, so they don't have the same degree of moral condemnation of what we might call, quote unquote, corruption. because what they saw is it's how power works, it's simply how it operates. And so it's almost like what's the movie Starman, Jeff Daniels, way back.
I have not.
Oh, okay, great. Old school movie. Because, like, for example, he's an alien who comes to the United States and he learns American culture. So part of what he learns is red means stop, green means go, yellow means go real fast. Because he's internalizing the rules around him. He also thinks hello involves, only one finger, because that's what somebody told him sarcastically. So he goes around flipping people off, thinking he's saying hello. So it's just about how you interpret internalized culture. But I have no doubt that that Project Veritas will once again be. There's almost none of their stories that have been effectively debunked.
That's another thing. Now, O'Keefe always repeats, and as do other people, they've never lost a defamation lawsuit. I don't know if that means when they're sued for defamation or when they sue. So I haven't been able to.
So when they're sued, but they do have over 300 corrections and retractions from major media sources. So that gives you an idea for how successful they've been. So I think they will be. It was too much of a hit piece by the New York Times. The New York Times could have done a subtle version of it. Now, going back to projection is accusation is projection is confession. Mighty interesting. There are both statements that, hey, if you're using unnamed sources, you're probably making it up or it's fake, because nobody does that more than the New York Times concerning Donald Trump. It
was a laughable accusation. I mean, that's the thing, is even if it were true, even if Project Veritas had censored the names for security, whatever, it's a laughable accusation, especially given everything, unnamed sources, people familiar with the people close to Trump. The whole tax story was based on a leak from an unnamed source. It was laughable. But what becomes even more clear about the projection, confession, accusation, from what seems to be the case in the way the story broke, it really seems that they were on a misinformation campaign against Project Veritas based on the way they crafted their article, the timing of the publication, and what it allowed them to subsequently ignore or downplay. So I'm going to do. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I'll say similar to what they did in the Hunter Biden story. I mean, it's been suppression of any story that could concern voter fraud. So, I mean, people all across the country have been receiving multiple ballots in the mail for people that do not live at their address. The media has pretended that isn't happening. They reported ballots, and you've had all the different stories of ballots thrown out that were filled in but never returned. Other examples of hundreds of ballots at an apartment building where nobody's there. There was a New York story about whether people were receiving ballots already filled in, and the media was quick to try to suppress it and attack it. So they've been obsessed with controlling the narrative. I mean, so much so that I believe, based on the projection is confession, accusation is confession principle, that I believe Nate Silver, Elliot Morris, high-ranking so-called polling observers, polling analysts at The Economist, at 538, the major data publication, Harry Enton at CNN. But both Elliot Morris and Nate Silver in the last week have come out and said that if Trump wins, it's because he cheated in some form. So, I mean, that's the narrative they've been trying. They put out fake polls. And they encouraged a bunch of pollsters to put out fake polls. I believe that now more than ever before. In the past, I thought it was just bad polling because polling is tough to do these days. But now I think it's deliberate, at least some part of it is. Because they wanted to build this fake story, that they wanted a story framework that said that if Trump lost, it could only be because nobody liked him, not because of any fraud. But if Trump won, it could only be because he suppressed the vote and stole votes. So it gives you and it's very deeply problematic, the political narrative they're building for the lawsuits and the legal cases and public opinion that's coming. I don't think they know the full consequences of their course of conduct, and it fits into a pattern with Ilhan Omar. So in the same sense that there was such a culture gap between with Islamic immigration to Europe, what they often found was younger Islamic men simply not adapting in certain instances to how you behave towards women in public settings. In some of these cases, it wasn't because they were bad or evil people. It was because there's just a massive culture gap. I mean, if you took me and throw me into the middle of Saudi Arabia, I guarantee you I'll probably be killed by the end of the day, because I'll offend that many people because I have no idea what I'm doing. So it's the same principle. It's just a massive culture gap. They haven't covered any of it as it relates to Ilhan Omar. Because there's the visa fraud allegations involving whether or not she was married to a relative. Then as soon as she gets office, she dumps the one husband that was meant for the visa and gets the other guy and the political guy and funnels all of her campaign cash through him, which is a easy way to basically create indirect bribery. But Joe Biden, she probably could have learned that from Joe Biden. But it's this pattern of suppression of information that's so off the charts that you're even seeing people like Clay Travis, who didn't vote for Trump in 2016, say he's voting for Trump because he's so bothered by the media being so crazy and censorship being off the charts. I don't think they understand what they're doing. They're discrediting themselves more than they discredited Project Veritas. They're able to keep the public from knowing about it, but they're not going to keep the part of the public that's really concerned about it from knowing about it.
Yeah, no, that's it. And Django Fed says, what do you think of this divide the media is creating by calling certain poll people uneducated while calling other people educated? It's a more polite version of the deplorable comment. I mean, and as if that makes a difference in any event. It's just a question of writing off the results so that you can blame it on a group of people who may not be visibly identifiable, but you can look down and say they made the wrong decision because of their education. As if. Thank you for the super chat, by the way.
It's part of the whole phenomenon of the whole culture. We have a whole culture of babied rich kids that believe that they're special, not just because mommy told them that, but believe they're special because they are part of the credentialed class. They have what they have because they're smart, because they work hard. Because when I was at Yale, I used to challenge other students. It's like, what if 10,000 people equally deserve to be here? And you're just here by luck of the roll of the dice. They couldn't handle that concept. I mean, because they'd grown up believing I deserve the power I have over other people because I'm smarter and more knowledgeable. Well, I was a poor scholarship kid at all these places. I haven't met any of them that were more knowledgeable or smarter, and I sure as heck wouldn't trust them with power. So he's right. What he's talking about is just class snobbery. It's class bigotry disguised as something else by people that the most dangerous thing about them is they think they're special when they're the least special people of all when it comes to managing and governing society.
No comment, but I'm noticing the phenomenon. It is a way just to discredit. It's a way to write off an individual without having to engage in discussion and without having to respect the fact that they might actually legitimately believe something different. If they believe it, it's because they're uneducated, and it's up to the intelligentsia to rule the lowly individuals who don't even know what's good for them.
They're the new clerical class. The only thing they're missing is a priest uniform in an Inquisition era.
Now, speaking of priests, do we go into Jerry Falwell? Are you following that story?
Yes, and I know a lot of people who know Falwell and weren't surprised maybe by some of the statements made. But the backstory is, I'll let you go with it. Okay, the
backstory, because I read the lawsuit today. I tell you, I have a problem. I feel bad for everybody. And I'm reading this, and at first I thought I knew enough about Jerry Falwell's situation to say that he's getting what he deserved. And I read that lawsuit, and now I'm thinking if some of the stuff in that lawsuit is true, I'm starting to feel bad for Jerry Falwell and what ended up happening. But long story short, so Jerry Falwell is an evangelical, I guess, leader. I don't know what the term would be, but respected in the community. His father founded Liberty University. He took over after his father died, or became involved, allegedly, highly involved in the university, evangelical university. Apparently, it's the largest private religious institution. I think something along those lines. Story breaks that what came first? Was it the pictures of him with his hand in his pants or his jeans open, making an inappropriate joke with another lady that got him in hot water? Then apparently a story breaks where someone whom his wife had an affair with in 2012 was allegedly blackmailing him and his wife for lots of money. The long and short of it is that the wife, they went to a place in Florida, stayed at a resort. Literally the lifeguard, the pool guy, befriended Jerry Falwell and his wife, ended up having an affair with Jerry Falwell's wife. Apparently later on starts trying to blackmail him, saying that he's got compromising video and pictures of his wife and recorded private conversations, which apparently he had. Falwell says, I'm not paying you anything. This is going to go nowhere. The individual who has these videos then hooks up with the Lincoln Project to basically spread a smear that whether or not it's true, it may be true, I don't know, that not only did he have an affair with Falwell's wife, but apparently Falwell himself would watch the two of them do these things together.
And just one interlude. I'm not suggesting that's a case of projection of many of the high-ranking members of the Lincoln Project, that they're those kind of people. I don't want anyone out there thinking that that's the kind of guys they are. Just okay.
Well, there's two things. Like there's the if it's false line, and then there's the even if it's true line. Like, okay, if that's the worst, if that's the worst thing somebody does, who are we to judge the morality of what three adults do on their own? Yes, he has a religious aspect to him, but that doesn't make something more sinful, in my humble opinion. But so that is the accusation. In light of the scandal, he resigns, or is forced to resign from Liberty University, which he now argues that forced resignation lent credence to the baseless accusations of the individual, mostly the Falwell watching part. He says they had an affair. We came to grips with it. We worked through it, and we stayed married. Liberty U forces his resignation. Apparently, they sign there was a non-disparagement clause in the contract. Apparently, after he leaves or is forced to resign, someone gives a speech to the whole university, disparages Falwell, says shame on him, is this terrible conduct. Everyone, it's okay to sin, but shame on Falwell. Disparages him. He can't get speaking gigs anymore. Life is ruined. I think that's the essence of the defamation lawsuit and breach of contract lawsuit. It's very well drafted. It's quite compelling to read if you assume that the allegations are true. I'm going one step further. Even if I assume the allegations are false and that Jerry Falwell actually did what is accused of him, that doesn't justify the extortion, and I'm not sure that justifies what's happening. But the religious world is a different world. What's your take on it? What do you think of it? Knowing more about the individuals and the parties involved, what's your view?
A brief question to the super chat: how do you turn the autofocus off of this thing? I was wondering what that was.
It goes into. I don't know that there's a way to do it.
Okay.
I think I'll ask, but
all right, yeah, so to honor the super chat, because that's great, because I've been trying to figure out why does it do that. That's how that's why I say I'm a genius in certain areas and incompetent in the others. Or how do you say it again?
Les incompetents.
Yeah, there it is. Yes, when it comes to technology, good. I'm an embarrassment. But to the backstory for Jerry Falwell is threefold. So his father, of course, was the founder of essentially, some people would say the founder of the politicization of the religious conservative community in America, beginning in the late 1970s. Supported Ronald Reagan over Jimmy Carter, who was the well-respected Baptist, who originally won in large part because of his strong Baptist support in the South. And so, and what happened was, beginning in the 1950s in the Deep South, there had been a bunch of homeschool and private school movements in response to integration orders by federal judges. By a completely separate phenomenon, in the late 1960s, early 1970s, evangelical, particularly fundamentalist evangelical Protestant culture, didn't like what was happening in public schools, and that public schools were becoming more and more overtly anti-religious. You had sort of the secular left take over teaching positions and ultimately also often boards of education. And so they weren't comfortable with all the cultural changes in Hollywood and on TV and in film and in music and the rest. So they started sort of self-segregating, kind of like the Amish, into their own worlds, and started creating, as part of that, either homeschooling or private schooling. It also corresponded to some independent left groups, actually, too, in the late 60s, early 70s. Well, when Jimmy Carter gets elected president, his Department of Education people are cultural leftists who attribute any effort at private schools in the South must be motivated by racism. So they go after Bob Jones University. They go after a wide range of places. Now, but there was some legitimate criticism of Bob Jones University, but there was a lot of illegitimate criticisms of the whole movement. They basically smeared the entire religious conservative movement. Much of it was rooted in places like Kansas. I mean, it was rooted in places that were anti-slavery, that led abolition, where John Brown was from. So it was a deep insult to these communities to suddenly be assaulted and under attack. And it was in response to that Falwell started to organize. He was a pastor of a major church. There's a famous case where he took Hustler up to the U.S. Supreme Court on a libel case, and that's where they said parody. It was correctly protected.
People versus Larry Flint.
The people, that has multiple aspects. It's Flint v. Hustler is the U.S. Supreme Court name. But yes, all part of that. Yeah, that's right. It's portrayed in the movie People versus Larry Flint. Yes, you're right. Yeah,
I was reading up on that recently, and I was watching the deposition of what was his name now? Flint, I'm an idiot. I was watching the deposition of Flint, one of the more curious depositions to watch. But sorry,
Can you imagine being his lawyer? Man, that would have been tough. That would have been tough.
For anybody who doesn't know, Flint picked his nose and ate the booger during the deposition, and the lawyer asked him. It is. I mean, the guy obviously had certain issues, but the world needs all types of people, especially given the outcome of that lawsuit. But sorry, I interrupted you, Robert.
Oh, yeah, but so that's some of the background of how it all starts. Falwell takes his church and decides he's going to start a private university. His goal was to create a Notre Dame for Baptists. That was really kind of his objective. So that's why Liberty's always been big on its football program, its basketball program, trying to develop those. Very big university. I visited there when I was a kid. It was for a while. I was thinking about going to a Christian school, Christian university. And ended up I got a scholarship to Yale, and then that went a whole different path. But so that's the background. So Falwell, this is his son, Jerry Falwell Jr., and he has had three different groups waging war on him. So the sort of secular left and modern media hates Falwell, hates his son, hates Liberty, hates everything associated with it. Has been constantly attacking them, sometimes from within the government, sometimes from outside the government. Then his second adversary became anti-Trump people, particularly anti-Trump people on the right, because Falwell gave major political blessing of the religious conservative community to Donald Trump from the very get-go. And he liked Trump, and he recognizing that Trump's cultural populism is right along the same lines of most Baptist believers. Trump's going to do very, very well on election day with evangelicals. And then but all the anti-Trump people hated him for that reason. They in their minds, evangelicals voted for Trump because Jerry Falwell Jr. blessed him. Totally false. Falwell was representing his community, not directing it. But this is how these people think. They think you can control people's thoughts, and the same elite people control others. Gatekeeper mindset.
Projection it's confession through projection. It's more of it. Once you start, you can never unsee it.
Yeah, exactly. And then the third problem over the last 5 years has been internal. There have been people at Liberty University who like the resources and power of Liberty University who've been trying to drive Falwell out. And so he has these three groups of adversaries coming after him, and he probably just underprepared his political protection to deal with it. Because his name is Liberty University. And so in his father's name. And so then they find a vulnerability, which is his wife purportedly had an affair with this guy out of Florida who had probably illicitly tape recorded it. I mean, my guess is that some of those activities took place in states that required both parties. Some degree of this was an issue we didn't get to last week, which we can briefly get to here: revenge porn. I mean, some of this, what they were describing, I was like, that's a crime. And for people who don't know, because there was a lot of states that have one-party consent, that as long as one person knows that the activity is being recorded, that makes it legal. The problem became that started getting abused by people who, when they broke up, would put pornographic videos or images of their ex on the web. And clearly this was not what the one-party consent rule was supposed to be about. And so a bunch of states, starting with California, then New York, now a bunch of states across the country, passed specific laws that when you publicize or threaten to publicize images, and Viva did a good separate video on defining what constitutes revenge porn in the different states.
It became totally without object when it became abundantly clear that was not what happened in the Giuliani Borat scene, but still it's still educational nonetheless. I'll link it.
Don't know it. I've had clients that have been victimized by this because it's a very. If you watch the show The Vow, Raniere, the head of The Vow, was sentenced to prison this week, and Scott Adams has actually raised some interesting questions about that case. I really dislike the guy, so but at some point we'll do we'll include that as part of a future show. But part of that was their great power over the women. Many of whom were smart, sophisticated women, career women. Was images that they were taken to be part of this group. So, I mean, this is a great, powerful source of blackmail and extortion and all of it. So that's why the law is passed to ban even the threatened use of it in certain contexts. And it sounded to me like that the unfortunate thing for Falwell is his wife fell in with someone who not only did she have an affair, but that this person was using revenge porn threats against her, entrapping her, and extorting her and him, and then blackmailing her and him. And because he didn't go along with it, he's the one who suffers the consequence. So in reading the defamation suit, it sounds like he has, I mean, first of all, they clearly violated the non-disparagement clause. I mean, that's a no-brainer winner for him.
That's what I mean. So they have a non-disparagement clause. For anybody who doesn't know what that is, I mean, it means that if you rupture your relationship, you don't speak ill of the other. And this one, it was redacted in the lawsuit, so I don't know how specific the terminology was or how specifically it was drafted for whatever the reason. It means you don't speak ill of the person. You don't speak, period. And it was either the day after he was forced to resign. Guy gets up in front of the entire school, and apparently, for whatever it's worth, this specific talk was organized to be even more publicly visible than a standard speech. I think it was online. It was published everywhere, and the words were not good. It was not what you say about someone when you have a non-disparagement clause in a contract.
And it didn't surprise me, because the war they've been waging against Falwell, here was always the big hurdle. Those of us who are on Falwell's side in this internal battle, they simply saw it that Falwell is liberty, and that there's no scenario in which they get rid of Falwell that liberty doesn't suffer. And so it better be absolutely compelling, whatever Falwell himself did. I mean, it was extraordinary with the suit. What they were detailing is Falwell acted the right way. He didn't engage in extortion. He refused to go along with it and be the victim of it, refused to go along with blackmail, refused to go along with any kind of entrapment. And he did what you're supposed to do in the evangelical tradition, which is to reconcile with your spouse, not look for an excuse to divorce your spouse. So he does what you're supposed to do, and then he gets punished for it because of their own political agenda. The reason why they were going to have to defame him and disparage him and break that rule is because the whole liberty, at least half of the liberty is behind Falwell. So they have to find ways for the community to feel okay with this. And this happens all the time in bureaucratic power seekers. They think they're above and beyond the people who help create the institution, and they're not.
Well, it's an amazing thing. I mean, I'm reluctant to be judgmental in terms of the sense of assigning blame in a context of infidelity, because the act itself is one which I have a theory that, like, you never do it, because I think if you do it, you're asking to be dealt with extreme prejudice by the other party, your spouse. But rarely is infidelity like a one-way thing where it's generally a culmination of a problem and not itself the cause of the problem.
Aside from certain personalities, I have a theory about it's my theory of Frenchmen in general, actually. But it's basically that they have distant fathers and spoiling mothers, and that creates a constant need for psychological approval by getting constant approval from women, and it leads to disproportionate adulterous culture. That's my theory. There's
a theory which I think some might find less offensive, for lack of a better word. Europeans have a different view on sex, and they have a different view on fidelity or monogamy, I should say.
The counter to that, or well, not say the counter to that, but I thought a film that best portrays this. There's the original French film, and then there's the pretty good English American remake. I think the American remake is called Unfaithful. I think it's Diane Lane, Richard Gere. But the idea, I forget what the French title was, but it's great. But the whole idea was that an affair really represents underlying problems. Leave it to the French to figure out a way that both an affair and some other things that happen bring the couple back together. I mean, only the French would have this idea of the world. But just like, what was it, Mitterrand, who's both his wife and his mistress were at his funeral. It's like, that would not necessarily happen. Well, maybe when Bill Clinton died.
No, it's all okay. Fine. His wife had an affair. Who knows? I mean, these are, first of all, if everybody who has an affair is going to be dealt with like this, there's a lot of people who are treating Falwell like this, who are undoubtedly guilty of similar sins, for lack of a better word again. But yeah, then the other part is, even if Falwell is guilty of having watched, I mean, he denies it, vehemently denies it, says it's part of the blackmail scheme, which the individual who's blackmailing him goes and gets free representation from the Lincoln Project and hooks up with them in order to bring this to, in order to bring this project to fruition.
And for folks, the Lincoln Project ties into our last week thing.
Yeah,
they were the ones behind defaming Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump.
So okay, so I mean, so that's it. I mean, non-disparagement clause. I think there's a strong argument. The defamation, to the extent they said anything, I think it's going to be defamatory. But then you're going to have to get into proving that what is being said is not true. How does Falwell prove a negative that he wasn't there watching when this man was having an affair with his wife? And what is that going to? I mean, what's that spectacle going to do on a PR front in general? Like bringing all this stuff even more public than it was before.
I think he only sued because he has no other alternative. In other words, that the damage that had been done was so deep that he gained more by bringing suit. I'm glad he's fighting back because I thought when he stepped down, he shouldn't have. He gave a perception of validity to the allegations that I didn't believe were likely true.
Well, I mean, and I say speaking as I was totally ignorant to the situation. Yeah, I first of all, I thought it was more to do with the pictures of him with that other woman, which I thought itself were not that bad. When I see the resignation, not knowing and still not knowing the degree to which it was a forced resignation, I immediately drew some negative conclusions just as an outsider. But I'm not posting those.
I think he's got to restore his reputation and start a counterattack on PR. And if I would either him or like Jared Kushner, Ivanka Trump, I would not just sue I don't think he's adding Lincoln Project at this point, but I would sue Lincoln Project. I would sue all the participants as co-conspirators under the Lincoln Project. And some of what they did here kind of sounds like federal crimes that are covered by the RICO statute. I would sue the funders of the Lincoln Project. Make them prove they weren't complicit in this, because that's some big names, some big money folks, some folks who need to be exposed to the limelight of life, and so of a good lawsuit. And so I hope I hope he at least thinks about doing that, because this is sleazy, classic DC kind of action. They smeared who I believe to be a good man for doing the right thing. I mean, what was he supposed to do? Divorce his wife? Shame his wife? Is that, I mean, what were assuming the allegations of the cuckold behavior, which, it's kind of, like I said, I'm not saying that Lincoln Project is accusing others of what they're doing, but just take a look at some of those guys, folks. So I'm glad he's fighting back, because it's long overdue and necessary for him to do so.
It is a compelling lawsuit. You would have to assume that all the allegations that he's lying through his teeth in the lawsuit, not to sympathize with him, especially since a lot of people out there have had infidelity in relationships and are not going to judge him for this harshly. And nor
when it wasn't him who had the relationship; it was his wife.
Consider this. There's been worse things done. I think there's worse things done, and let the person without sin cast the first stone when it comes to cheating on a spouse, because a lot of people have done it. And this is not confession through projection. I strongly believe that if I were to ever cheat on a spouse, that I would get murdered in my sleep. I mean, that's just the way I assume that would happen. And that's enough that and other phobias is enough to keep one well in line. Keep your hands to yourself, and nobody can accuse you of things in the future. This is what I want to bring up here. Brendan Brown says, can true statements be defamatory if they are used in a context intending to be defamatory? So acute quirk in Quebec law, defamation can occur even if the statements are true. That may sound shocking to other people, but even in other jurisdictions, you can have public disclosure of a private fact, which can be true, but nonetheless sanctionable. And you can have false light, which could be a true fact spun to make it look worse or bad, and that can be sanctionable as well. Robert, am I out in left?
That's exactly right. So it's technically not defamation; it's invasion of privacy, but they're all governed by the same First Amendment standards. But yes, a true statement can cause you to be sued. Here it's easy, the breach of contract, because it was a non-disparagement provision. So non-disparagement doesn't matter whether it's an opinion or a fact, doesn't matter whether it's true or it's false. You can't say anything disparaging, period. You get sued for breach of contract.
Yeah, it'll be a big one. We'll be following it. I think I'm going to do probably vlogs on these two separate defamation suits this week. It's a question of, at some point, defamation suits become repetitive, but these are stories that people are going to probably want to follow and know the actual facts on, so they can come to their own conclusions. Alexander, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, on top of that, because why hasn't this guy been charged with blackmail and extortion attempts? Because clearly he was doing it, and was Lincoln Project members co-complicit in it? Some of them live in Florida, like Rick Wilson. Was he a co-conspirator in this criminal activity? Why isn't someone investigated it? Why isn't someone being prosecuted for it? That's the other angle, I think, to this case.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. And I had that thought. I just don't know what complaints have been filed. I'm sure we'll find out, and I'm sure he's getting the advice that it's potentially and probably not even arguably criminal conduct. If it's not revenge prawn, it's I mean, at the very least, it's blackmail. It's, I mean, those revenge laws are essentially a form of blackmail. Please do a segment on Keith Rainier and the NXIVM cult. We're going to do a show on this because a few people had sent me Scott Adams' interview, and it's interesting. I know nothing about that. I mean, I knew nothing about it. There's certain things that I just have never even brought to my attention.
Yeah, so it's the TV show The Vow. Apparently, by the way, his name is pronunciated like canary, so it's Ranieri. But that you could tell that guy was a cult personality from day one. But the smarts of it and the people that are still advocating for him. And like, it was interesting to me. I mean, I'll because it's Scott Adams, I'll look at it a little bit deeper. But when I watched part of that interview, I was not impressed by the woman that he had on that used to be an actress. She didn't know basic facts. I was like, okay, if you're going to say the government planted evidence, I'm game to hear that. It's the Southern District in New York. But she didn't know whether it was backed up or not by the accuser anyway. And I was like, okay, then maybe you're not quite talking about what you're talking about. But it would not surprise me if, because of who Ranieri was, and because of who the Southern District of New York is, that they convicted someone who might be guilty, but used illicit methods to do so. And it's amazing how well they've suppressed that part of the story.
Very interesting. That'll have to be it. We'll do that. We've got that on the back burner, and we've got O.J. Simpson. We've got Scott Peterson. One day when there's a quiet week, we'll just do an entire show on an in-depth on one of these. There was a question here. It was Alex Havas. I need Barnes to talk about Texas in light of the insane turnout numbers.
It's actually about as expected. So the reason why a lot of people think the turnout numbers are crazy is because the press did a good job of suppressing what the polls were predicting. So the polls were predicting in some states that would join, like for a long time, Arizona, Nevada, Florida for the most part, North Carolina substantially. You've had as much as 75, 80, 85% of the people who are going to vote before election day, vote in early voting. Texas really took to that in the primaries, or earlier on in the year, and it was expected in the public opinion polls. 85 to 90% of Texas voters said they were going to vote early, and the turnout to date is consistent with that. So and what I can tell you is, like, I've been monitoring this for also possible irregularities. In other words, where you see unusual minority turnout in some places, either low or high, to argue either suppression or fraud. And for the most part, it hasn't happened, including in Texas. For the most part, I mean, I understand the issues with Harris County, but African-American turnout is down everywhere, including Texas, as a share of the vote. And the Mexican-American vote is way down. So if you're going to try to pad ballots, the Democratic Party, you would do it in the border counties along West Texas. Hidalgo, Jim Webb. They got some great county names. They got Jim Hogg County, Zapata County, Zapata County. So it's like, the Zapatistas, the Emiliano Zapata, the great Mexican revolutionary. Kind of loosely the basis of Zorro. So that kind of imagery, those counties have extremely low turnout. They're the lowest turnout by far. So I have not seen any evidence of voter fraud out of Texas, at least as a whole. I don't, I haven't looked into the factual details of the Harris County case enough to give you a judgment. I do understand what the Republicans are concerned about. I understand what the Democrats' views are too. They should have done it a different way, in my view, but we'll see what happens with the court. But so far, there is not much evidence of that. Now, I'll get into more detail on this tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern time,
right here.
With the People's Pundit Daily. There will be the last pre-election version of What Are the Odds. And apparently a lot of people are following bets. So like a bunch of people are making little bets, like $800, $1,000. Some people email me and say, should I bet everything? And I'm like, never bet everything. Never do that.
$800 is like the biggest bet I could think of making in my life. But I've been following this, and I pulled up the comment, can't find it now. Michigan's like 3-1 odds going Republican, where I think even if you think it's a coin flip, you bet on that every day of the week, because it's not 3-1. I mean, it depends on what you think it is, but
Well, I'll give people a little exclusive news. Biden's own internal polls had him down this weekend in Michigan.
Okay.
That's why he was suddenly flooding people into Michigan.
If
So
that changes.
that's you. What I've always told people: if you want to know whether somebody's internal polls or what somebody is reporting or the rumor mill is, just watch what they're doing as candidates. So he's clearly in big trouble in the Midwest because he's decided to camp out there, and so he doesn't. So his polls are not showing what the media polls are showing.
And this Jason, now this will be an answer to your question right now. I'm not sure that the polls are trusted, and it's an interesting thing. You see what they're reacting to, and that's because they have internal polls that are not public polls. Now I'm going to bring this one up here. Django Fett says, didn't the founding fathers overlook the possibility of two political parties forming and advise after the fact, but it was too late?
They were hopeful that the partisanship, and it's also useful that there wasn't quite the kind of what we think of today as parties wasn't really that big of a reality. I think they were fundamentally right. Their greatest fear was the return of royalty and institutionalized power. And so they focused on that. And rather than worry about things that hadn't come about yet, that they couldn't quite anticipate. He's right. They did not anticipate partisanship, did not like partisanship. I can tell you institutions over time turned out they liked partisanship because two parties work well to create a duopoly, which I had to explain to a federal judge, by the way, what that meant. He's like, duopoly? Duopoly? What are you talking about?
I've only heard of the game.
Exactly. And I was like, well, it's where two powers get together and monopolize everything. So the sort of like Apple and Google, that kind of thing in certain markets, app market in particular. So I think it's but yes, he's right that they didn't anticipate it, wouldn't have liked it, warned against it. They called it factionalism rather than partisanship. But I think they sided on the right side. I mean, the only way to prevent that would have been an anti-democratic solution, and I'm not in favor of that.
Okay, people are asking for the New York Times article on Trump taxes, another one, or Google and Ted Cruz, but I think we need to do one and make sure we get to it before I get interrupted. Kyle Rittenhouse. Okay, there's updates, and I sort of understand them, but I know that people are not going to I have questions and other people are going to have more questions. Okay, Kyle Rittenhouse had his extradition hearing last Friday, correct?
Yes.
Okay, they raised the arguments. Now, what arguments did his attorneys raise to the court that were ultimately apparently not retained?
So in their habeas filing, their habeas petition brief, they raised the argument that the federal interpretation of extradition under the Seventh Circuit allowed them to raise probable cause challenges to the underlying criminal charges, which is in fact not allowed, of course, under Illinois law or any law, because in the United States is governed by the extradition language of the Constitution, as we talked about. So I was baffled by that argument. They missed the apparent argument. The best argument was a principle of dual criminality, which is that in even under our extradition clause, for folks that don't know necessarily the context, may not have watched the prior episodes.
True.
For extradition, the extradition between countries is governed by treaties between those countries. And in the United States, you're allowed to bring a constitutional challenge to extradition to a foreign country. And in many foreign countries, you can under their respective constitutions. So you can challenge effectively whether a probable cause fits in certain contexts before you can be extradited between a foreign country. Other constitutional rights can be raised about your mistreatment. So a lot of Assange's arguments against being extradited to the United States are arguments that you could raise if he was being extradited to the United Kingdom from the United States about poor treatment, poor prisons, poor facilities, etc. In the United States, however, between the states, that's governed by the extradition clause of the United States Constitution. The United States Constitution requires that any state extradite anyone simply upon request. And the only limitation is that the formality of the request be proper, that the identity of the person be confirmed. In other words, you can't be extradited for somebody else that happens to share your name. Or third, and this isn't a unique argument that I thought Rittenhouse could raise. I raise it in other contexts. And it's that it still has to be a crime, because what the language is in the extradition language in the clause of the Constitution is it's for a crime. So, for example, you can't extradite someone for something that's not criminal. Well, part of that in the international extradition context, they've defined what that means. It means a certain duality, dual criminality. It means that the same behavior is a crime in both jurisdictions. My view was, given the details of what was included in the probable cause affidavit, much more so than is normal, they created the opportunity to argue that under Illinois law, which has a broader definition of self-defense in certain areas than Wisconsin does, you could argue that what was criminalized under Wisconsin law is not a crime under Illinois law, assuming the facts of the affidavit to be true, which is required for the formality of these proceedings. They didn't raise that argument at all, ever. Instead, they argued that international standards should apply, not the extradition clause to the U.S. Constitution, though they didn't realize they were making that argument. Apparently, they figured it out by the time John Pierce showed up at the hearing, because he goes into the hearing. Before the hearing, he says he's going to call 2 experts. He's going to call his mom. I didn't know why he was thinking about putting his mom on the stand, but he was going to put the mom on the stand. He was going to challenge everything about it. He gets there, and I guess he figured out by the time he showed up at the hearing that all of those arguments were frivolous that he had raised. He doesn't put any witness on the stand at all, which, given that, if you're going to grandstand, you might as well put a witness on the stand. Instead, he relies solely on their little technical argument, which was that one prosecutor didn't swear out a part of the extradition request before a judge, even though another prosecutor already had to correct that technicality. Not only that, he gets up and grandstands in front of the judge. He goes, "Judge, that's game, set, match." The judge, you could tell, was agitated because the way the judge, so no shock, he loses. Rittenhouse is going to be ordered extradited. This apparently was a total shock to Lynn Wood. Apparently it was a shock to John Pierce because he'd been on Fox a week or two before saying Rittenhouse was going to walk home free that day. Maybe a shock to Rittenhouse and his mom. We don't know. And because the judge's order, it gives you a sense of the judge's contempt for Pierce. And by the way, it's what more and more judges and lawyers are thinking in general, that Rittenhouse has a joke of a defense. Now, his substantive defense is fantastic, but he's got jokers for lawyers. And that's what's making a joke of the defense. Because the judge concludes, he repeats himself 6 times. The beginning of every sentence is, under Illinois law, you can't raise this argument. Under Illinois law, you can't raise that argument either. Under Illinois law, he's basically saying, you're such an incompetent lawyer, you didn't understand the elementary elements of Illinois law. So also because they're both incompetent, Lynn Wood said, "Don't worry, we're going to file the appeal." John Pierce said the same thing.
An appeal of the rejection of the opposition to the extradition.
Correct. So they were going to appeal the judge's extradition order, even though now their only argument, because they'd waived all the other ones, they didn't raise any of them at the hearing, didn't present any evidence in support of it. And this, by the way, is after they've asked for continuance after continuance after continuance, didn't even review basic facts with him for over a month, while Rittenhouse has sat in jail now for over 2 months for no cause at all.
Can I just make sure I understand the extradition argument? The extradition argument is that they want to extradite him from Illinois to Wisconsin. The duality argument is that, assuming the allegations in the in the probable cause are true, that it would not be a crime in Illinois, or that he would have a defense to extradite.
It would not be a crime. That it doesn't reach the probable cause standard because of certain self-defense principles that are uniquely applicable in Illinois.
Now, but let me ask you the stupid question: if the crime occurred in Wisconsin, what difference does it make what the applicable law would have been in Illinois?
Because it's dual criminality. So what it is under the dual criminality principle, and this, by the way, would have been a novel argument. It has not been raised in Illinois before. It hasn't been raised in most states before. But dual criminality is, let's say Canada makes it a crime not to wear a mask. And somebody in Canada doesn't wear a mask, but it's an American, comes back to America. But in America, that's not a crime. And let's say it's a misdemeanor, or it's not a crime at all in America. Then America can say, we don't make that conduct a crime. So if both jurisdictions have to make the same conduct criminal, because the concern is this: one governing body will make something a crime that we don't consider a crime, and they'll extradite people for it when we're like that. You can imagine where this came up in the pre-Civil War. It was the Fugitive Slave Act and other contexts like that. That's why they had to pass a Fugitive Slave Act, because the issue was whether somebody could be extradited for something that you couldn't enslave someone in one part of the fleeing something that was slavery could not be a crime in Kansas, but could in Mississippi. They passed federal law to force Kansas to send people back, and that's ultimately what led. And they did the horrible Dred Scott decision, ultimately what led to the Civil War, frankly. So that's kind of the political pretext. The concern is we're not going to extradite someone for conduct we don't think is a crime in our jurisdiction, even if your jurisdiction does.
Okay.
So that was, and I also thought that would highlight the underlying argument. I was like, that would highlight the underlying. If you think it's better, if you think you can't get him bail, or he's willing to wait there because it's a decent juvenile facility that has low risk for him, and you want to raise the sort of the backstory of this is such a ridiculous charge that Illinois would even prosecute it under probable cause standards, then that would be the way to do it if you were going to make an argument. There's a very strong argument made by Robert Grueller and a lot of other people, which is that's a novel argument. It's a long shot argument. Just go ahead and agree voluntarily to be transferred to reduce bail, and leverage that argument for bail terms, and get the clock moving in the criminal case. Because especially if you can't get him bail, he's sitting in jail for a long time. And that's a very good argument. My only point was, if you were going to fight extradition, I only knew of one way to do so.
Has that principle been tested in other states? Would that principle be interstate, or would that be call it a federal principle that would apply in the same way to any states with differing duality on criminal laws?
My view is it's the definition of the word crime under the extradition clause of the U.S. Constitution. So it also creates a federal constitutional question that could actually give you federal court jurisdiction in certain instances. So but it is a novel argument. It's never been adjudicated by any higher court that I know of, at least not since like a long time ago. Otherwise, you'd have to do the Doc Holliday defense. This is why when people are all thrilled that Illinois wasn't going to indict, if I'd been representing Rittenhouse, I would have tinkered around with the idea of having Illinois indict him on some small charge. If you know how to work it politically. Let me give you
what does the Doc Holliday mean? It means if he's indicted in two jurisdictions, then he'll get I don't know, imprisoned in the jurisdiction in which he physically finds himself?
Or maybe granted bail. So here's the Doc Holliday story. So everybody remembers, well, some people may remember, great films. What was it? One's Tombstone, and I forget. The other one's just Wyatt Earp, I think.
Because I'm getting mixed up between Doc Hollywood, which was a terrible movie with Michael J. Fox.
Yes, not Doc Hollywood. Doc Holliday, the great gunfight at the OK Corral. So with Wyatt Earp, Tombstone is a really good movie for it. Val Kilmer does a great Doc Holliday. So what happens is Doc Holliday defends Wyatt Earp. They get into a shootout at the OK Corral. By various political factors, the people that end up gaining power in the Arizona territory want Doc Holliday prosecuted. So he decides to hijack it to Colorado. He becomes very popular in Colorado, in part because of the gunfight at the OK Corral. The reason why he's called Doc Holliday is he was a dentist, and he went there because he had tuberculosis, so he needed different air. So the question was, how could Colorado get around the Arizona extradition request, given the extradition clause of the Constitution? Well, there is an exception, which is a state does not have to extradite someone that they themselves are criminally prosecuting. So they decide, of course, knowing Doc Holliday, he ends up shooting somebody else in a street fight. And originally they weren't even going to charge him, but then they're like, we'll go ahead and charge him with that, so that we say, we can't extradite him. We have to wait for this case to go on. And that case magically just never went to trial. And they just released him on bail and let him go where he wanted. So it's actually the most way out of an extradition in the United States is you get the local government, if they're politically friendly, to charge you with something else. They deny the extradition request. Then they release you on bail under those separate other charges. And they just drag out that case for 3, 4, 5 years. And maybe you get a different prosecutor in a Waukesha County, et cetera. So, for obvious reasons, I wasn't going to disclose that strategy in advance publicly. But now the ship has sailed. That strategy is gone.
They are now formally precluded from raising any of the arguments, even if they appeal. You can't raise arguments that you haven't raised.
Well, that leads us to the second part of the story. This group of geniuses, Lynn Wood and John Pierce, didn't know that you needed to request a stay of the extradition order at the hearing. So while they're yipping on the internet and on Twitter about the great grand fight they're going to take and so forth, Rittenhouse is being picked up and dropped off at the Illinois border, the Wisconsin border, and given over, and he's already been extradited. He's sitting in a Kenosha jail tonight. They apparently didn't know this. And Linwood was like, what is this going on? This is something unusual. No, it's not, Wood. If you knew what you were doing, you would know that you can't do that. But he is back on raising money. So apparently this is somehow they've raised over 2 million plus, which would have been enough for bail. But apparently they've already blown through, I guess, 1 million, because he's saying he needs to raise another 1 million for bail. So he's asking for people to send in donations, though where you go to the donation page, it's not limited to Rittenhouse. So Wood can do whatever he wants with the money. So this is becoming more and more of just an open scam, in my view. This is what happens when you have completely incompetent jokes of lawyers. And so all these people that have been vouching, I mean, like Michelle Malk and other people that have been vouching for John Pierce, he has zero criminal experience of any consequence. I mean, you don't take my word for it. I mean, one, I get bombarded still with emails and messages from.
I want everyone to appreciate here. I've seen a bunch of comments. Robert Barnes, rules of ethics, and Barnes follows them, is you cannot solicit a client by directly contacting the client. Right. Especially you cannot contact a client directly whom you know to be represented by counsel.
They would sue me the very next day.
Yeah, and I have no doubt about that either. But so, I mean, if everybody wants, share the video on social. I put out the highlight tomorrow. So,
but, I mean, all you out there, you can do whatever you want. I can't direct you to do anything, but you can do whatever the heck you want. So, I as a lawyer am not allowed to communicate to a represented party.
So that's where he's in Kenosha now.
He's in Kenosha. So now Linwood is begging for bail money because apparently he didn't save much of the rest of the money for bail. So now John Pierce has not yet appeared in the Wisconsin case. So it wouldn't shock me terribly if maybe Pierce never appears. I can tell you the scuttlebutt there in Kenosha was there were some people who thought the judge might deny his pro hoc appearance because of his long history of corruption scandals and thinks the guy's a rube. Their reputation of John Pierce and Lynn Wood and what they've done in this case is extremely bad in Kenosha, in the legal community, extremely bad. If Rittenhouse is going to have any chance, those two need to be nowhere near the substantive defense that he's going to present. Because apparently, John Pierce, people don't know, he's been sued by everybody and his brother. Lynn Wood is being sued by every partner he's recently had, accusing them of fraud, accusing them of other bad acts. You can read the lawsuits for yourself. Pierce has been sued, I guess, 3 more times in the last month. I mean, it's unbelievable. So I don't believe they have. I believe that even if they did have Rittenhouse's best interest at heart, which I don't believe they do, they're not capable or competent to deliver. And this is a show of it. This has been a disastrous first start, a disaster for the impression of his defense in the court of legal opinion and public opinion.
And wasted money. I mean, and for people who don't know or can't appreciate it, this is big money that has to just by virtue of the time lapse, the amount of work, the amount of involvement. So even if they appeal now, can they raise these arguments that we just discussed, or despite the fact that they were not raised previously?
You can't raise any argument once the extradition occurs. The only time you can raise an argument is if there's a jurisdictional argument, and that's only going to apply to an international extradition. So but even that's hard to do because of a decision that relates to narcos. So when the DEA went down and kidnapped a doctor, brought him back to who they thought was involved in the torture of the DEA agent that was portrayed, I think, in the first season of Narcos Mexico, the 3rd season of Narcos, the series on Netflix. A great series, by the way. I highly recommend it. And there was a good documentary that we've previously discussed where one of the investigators talks about what really happened, how the DEA was actually involved in it. In all likelihood, high-ranking U.S. government officials were complicit in the torture and murder of one of our own agents because he stumbled onto something he didn't know what he was stumbling into. Usually when that happens, it's naivete. It's like the great movie, The Whistleblower, about the woman who discovered the child trafficking and sex trafficking taking place under the guise of the various troop and UN troop movements in Europe. And the reason why she got into such trouble and had to escape in different ways was because of her naivete. She didn't know how the system really functions. And it looks like the same thing happened, unfortunately, to the agent who was killed in Mexico. By cartels, but likely either at the direction or at least with the knowing acquiescence and complicity of military officials in Mexico and high-ranking U.S. officials, including the DEA, including a person that in that first season they celebrate the guy who runs the local office. It looks like that guy was the one who actually set him up to be killed. So that part Narcos got wrong. They didn't know about that part.
Okay.
Then in that context, but it went up to the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court said you can, as long as you kidnapped him, there's no jurisdictional defense. So it's one of those it goes back to a Pinkerton case in the 1890s. The Pinkertons used to go and kidnap people and bring them back for U.S. prosecution. And there was a U.S. case that said as long as it was kidnapping, what it is if you're brought to the United States pursuant to extradition, then the jurisdiction of the United States is limited by the conditions and terms of that extradition. That's why if someone's extradited and it's agreed that they will not be subject to the death penalty, the U.S. the U.S. court doesn't have jurisdiction to issue a death penalty because of the limitation of the extradition. But sadly, in a very controversial decision, the U.S. Supreme Court said, if you just kidnap them, even if you're government agents that kidnap them, magically you're now exempt from that rule. And that between the United States, once you go from extradite from one state to the next, all of your extradition defenses are gone and lost.
I mean, and at some point, maybe it's just better off to stop wasting time and money on the argument of the extradition, just get down to a trial in Wisconsin. I can't find the super chat now, but the question was on the merits. I don't think many people disagree. Many people who have seen, even if all they read is the New York Times, I don't think many people disagree on the merits. It's probably going to come down to an obvious case of self-defense.
Mm-hmm.
Why not?
I mean, the problem, but it's so political. Here's what the risk he faces, and I think they've already blown it in part over the last 2 months, is suddenly some witness shows up that puts some sort of words in his mouth or says they saw something that wasn't recorded on video, because like the first shooting is not cleanly recorded on video, and that's where he faces his most risk, is somebody coming up with a story that's different than what may be the true story. But remember, I mean, Antifa does this all the time. It's part of their training, is to lie to police officers, lie to law enforcement. They pretend to be press. They do this all lie about their identity, so on and so forth. Their whole method of criminal activities is to not be caught. That's why they wear masks. That's why they wear the same uniforms, same outfits, same clothes, etc. Is to have no identifying information available. So the risk, not only that, he's going to be, if they don't get him bailed out quick, he's stuck in a Kenosha jail that's high risk to him. Because Kenosha, apparently, this tells you how political they are. Apparently, they've decided to put him in an adult jail, not a juvenile jail.
It's crazy. I mean, there's people are saying there's plenty of video on Kyle, and we had discussed this previously, which was part of your strategy, which would have been get an army of people online to gather all of that information before it gets memory hold. Investigate the way prosecutors are not going to investigate for his defense. Okay. I mean, I think I think that's it for that particular. Nothing else in Rittenhouse right now. He's in Wisconsin. The next steps now are going to be his lawyers are going to decide whether or not they appeal the decision. Otherwise, what do they do? How do they just press forward to get a trial date?
Yeah, they can't appeal because there's the habeas corpus is someone has my body illicitly. And it's they no longer have his body in Illinois. So there's nothing to appeal. The case is over. So the only thing now is getting bail, getting the most favorable bail, getting him out quickly. It should be priority one. Really, they should have already had a backup. They should have had people they talked to in the Kenosha jail who are in custody. There's people, I won't go into too much detail, but you don't have to watch shows. What was the show, the motorcycle show that was real popular for a while? I'm blanking on the name. It was
Knight Rider. I have no idea.
There's like 7 seasons of it, and it just like took off for a while. The guy that's crazy anti-Trump that likes to smoke cigars, but he played the Doomsday character in the Avengers.
Sons of Anarchy, people are saying.
Yes, that's it. Yes, Sons of Anarchy. Put it this way: there's people you can. If I'd been representing him, I would have already talked to people that are in the Kenosha jail to make sure he would be safe and protected. And there's ways you can take care of that without explaining how. I'll just say Sons of Anarchy might be a good a kind of documentary on how some of that works. The same with Better Call Saul. Better Call Saul has some good components to that. As another little TV shout out. But that would be, they should be doing that. I guarantee they're not. John Pierce has no clue. To my knowledge, he's never represented an incarcerated individual ever. I don't believe Lynn Wood has represented an incarcerated individual ever, to my knowledge. They have no idea how they didn't know how extradition worked. They didn't know how stays of appeals work. They didn't know how habeas petitions work.
You're going to people who are going to be very cynical, who are going to think that the attorneys might be viewing this as a cash cow now that they've got $1 million and they know they can raise more money at the drop of the hat because people feel more sympathy for the kid than hatred, than scorn for the attorneys. And it's
and what I've been saying all along for anybody asking was just that all the money raised for the kid go to the kid and his family. Just go to his mom. Let the mom control where that money goes. That would remove that risk. They refuse to do so. They refuse to give penny one, as far as I know. So it's a deeply problem. So problem one right now is where he's at. He's at Kenosha. He's in a high risk situation as we talk tonight. And unfortunately, I don't think they've prepared. So when people are like, hey, he can't lose, what's to worry about? Yes, there's been plenty of innocent people railroaded and went to prison on no evidence. That's why they make documentaries and movies about him later.
I mean, I'm not to say that Scott Peterson is innocent. No, but convicted on literally one strand of hair. Here you have video evidence. The conviction is going to be based on one's interpretation of that video evidence. It can go either way.
It's going to go to jury selection and witness presentation, and as well as experts. And some of the experts he listed were not some of the best. There were one or two good, like the behavior panel. If I would be employing those kind of people to look at least as forensic witnesses for jury selection ultimately, but also for look at this, tell me what's happening, tell me other people we can use as experts to explain what this state of mind is. Because the problem for liberals, by the way, and that's half of Kenosha, I mean a third of Kenosha, but I mean the vote was split even between Trump, and Trump will win it barely probably this time because of the rioting in part. But that means a lot. If people follow on Twitter, all the liberals believe he's completely guilty. They have no doubts about his guilt, and you cannot be. So a third of your jury pool is already going to come in thinking he's guilty.
Before I hear people coming down, I hear some noise. Last question on this, because I don't want the kids to hear the bad stuff. Death penalty in Wisconsin or no?
They're only asking for life imprisonment.
Only, okay.
Yeah, only, yeah.
Okay, so look, we've gone 2 hours and 20 minutes. I think we've covered everything we had on the table. We might have missed some stuff, but we'll save some stuff for next week. One question that I brought up, but I lost it now. Anchor babies, legal or not, as per Supreme Court?
I still lean towards the decision for a lot of reasons, that it's not locked into law that being born within the jurisdiction of the United States makes you a citizen of the United States. But I lean in that direction. I believe that's the better interpretation legally. And if you want to change it politically, go ahead, have at it. But I believe if you're born in the United States or inside the jurisdiction of the United States, which can't extend to military places and other territories, then you are a citizen of the United States.
Django thinks the solution would be to start earlier. That would just mean more noise much earlier on, and possibly marital problems if I were to abscond for the better part of the Sunday afternoon. Okay, look, Owen, I think it was Owen. His name is Owen. I forget what it was. Last name. Book and movie recommendation for the week.
So, yeah, I mean, The Contours of American History by William Appleman Williams, great book, explains things that are otherwise maybe difficult to explain, helps put Trump into a certain kind of historical context. I highly recommend it if you want to understand American politics in general, the emerging Republican majority, even though it was written in 1968. It's the whole history of all the different groups within America that matter, from Norwegians in Minnesota to Poles in Pittsburgh, that are going to matter on election night, 2 nights from now. Those two are the books I would recommend, especially in light of the election upcoming. And yeah, those are my 2 best book recommendations for the week.
Okay, excellent. And there's going to be some developments in a number of stories that we're following. Okay, I don't think the kids are actually coming down. I just hear stomping and screaming upstairs, which might be as good an indication as anything. Okay, what do we say? We're going to wind it up. So your next appearance is for next week. You're going to be on People's Pundit tomorrow.
Yes, I'll be on People's Pundit tomorrow, but mostly, go to the locals, Viva Barnes Law at locals. I will be there. I'll start being active tonight, actually, but on election night, that will be the election day. It's the only place I will exclusively be. So I'll be answering questions, responding, giving insights, putting out some videos, putting out other things. So people have legal questions, political questions, also going to book and movie recommendations, going to use the locals to do some book reviews and movie reviews and stuff like that. It's going to be exclusive to that community.
It's going to be very good, and it's going to be very interesting. People think the paywall is one thing; it's just going to be a bar. I'm an idiot. I thought it was locale, like a room number. It's for the locals, but we're going to have as much content so that it's not a question of people needing money to see it. This is just going to be a different place where there's going to be a community that is paywall to some extent, but it's going to be the way to support the channel as well and support what we do.
And it's the ticket is an invitation to curate the community. So but it's $5, folks, $5 a month. So that's the cheapest legal advice or the cheapest legal commentary you'll ever receive.
And for everyone, if it's a $5 and you only have $5, I mean, take it from YouTube and bring it over to locals. Someone asked for your predictions on the Electoral College. I think I remember what it was, but what's your prediction on the Electoral College?
So currently, I think the map I put up was 322, I believe. Yeah. That Trump keeps all the states and adds Minnesota, New Hampshire. May change my mind on Nevada by tomorrow, but not changing my mind on Trump.
There's no chance he wins California. Like none. It's 10-1 on all of these sites.
It should be 2,000-1. You can bet Biden to win California, win New York, win Illinois. In fact, pretty much almost every Democratic state that Hillary won, except Minnesota, New Hampshire, Nevada, and the odds are not good to take Colorado. But everything else, you can probably safely bet Biden. It's the nature of our divided electorate.
Well, it's going to be amazing. My optimistic prediction is that there will not be as much upheaval as the media and some folks are. I have my expression: every fear hides a wish. People fearing it, there's a part of them that sort of wants to see it happen. I don't think it's going to happen. I think one way or another, it'll be battled in the courts. People are going to be fatigued after this. I have my own prediction as to where it's going to go, and people are just going to chill out for the next little while. That's my fingers crossed, optimistic view on it. Let's do it. We're going to end it now. Robert, thank you very much. Everybody, thank you all. It's going to be a big week. If we don't do a midweek stream, locals, the day of the election, we're going to be there. I might be on Rekieta for a bit. His schedule's a little different than mine, but I might go on Rekieta on election night. I am not live streaming anything on election night on my channel because I have been bitten by the hand of you. I've been bitten by YouTube. I'm not doing live streams that involve a reaction to anything going on in the background. But with that said, everyone, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for all the support. Robert, amazing as always. And we'll see everyone everywhere on social media. Robert, you want to say your goodbyes?
Yeah, no, just hop over to locals. That's what will be all week, and have some fun. And it's because the website. What's the title? It's a Viva Barnes Law.
Viva Barnes Law on locals, but you'll find it, and I'll put the pin. I'll put the comment in the.
And that's where we can start to create a community where we can have our own little American Revolutionary tavern of the ancient days.
I may even have a snifter of port live when we do some stuff over there. But
there you go, sweet.
All right, everybody, have a good night, have a good rest of the weekend, and I'll see you on the interweb.